If you're ready to rest, you're in the right place. Close your eyes, relax your body, and drift into a slower time. You can also let us know in the comments where in the world you currently are and what time it is for you. In a medieval world where happily ever after was more fairy tale than reality, matchmaking was less about stolen glances and more about strategic spreadsheets. Picture a time when the heart had about as much say in marriage as a medieval cat had in its choice of owner. Yep, love was the least of the concerns when it came to tying the knot. In this era, the wedding bells were more likely to ring for political alliances and economic windfalls than for starry-eyed romance. Let's dive into the surprising realities of betrothals. Spoiler alert, it's not the stuff of heart-shaped candy boxes. Forget the notion of couples meeting at the medieval equivalent of Starbucks. Instead, these arrangements often involved children. Yes, little Johnny and Jane were getting betrothed before they'd even figured out which end of the spoon went into their mouths. It's as if the Middle Ages decided that the best way to plan a future was to start before the kids could even spell future. Now, a betrothal in medieval times was, in essence, a business contract. Parents and noble families were the real power players here, sealing deals with all the enthusiasm of a modern-day CEO signing a merger. Take, for example, the marriage negotiations for Margaret of York, who was betrothed at the tender age of 3. Her primary qualification for marriage? Being born into the right family. It was all about the family name, the lands, and the alliances that came with it. Forget love at first sight, it was more like a love at first sight of the family crest. And speaking of business, let's talk about the dowry. If you're imagining it as a quaint little wedding gift, think again. This wasn't just a chest of linens and some farm animals. We're talking cold, hard economic strategy here. A dowry was like the medieval equivalent of a stock portfolio. It could include cash, land, or valuable goods, whatever would sweeten the deal and keep the economic gears turning. In 1396, for instance, the dowry of Valentina Visconti, who married Louis of Orleans, was a whopping 450,000 gold francs. That's a lot of cows, people. Dowries were a financial lifeline, a way to ensure that the bride's family was taken care of and that the marriage was appealing enough to the groom's family. They were also a not-so-subtle insurance policy. Should the marriage go south, the bride had something to fall back on. And in a society where personal choice was rarer than a unicorn sighting, that bit of financial security was as close to empowerment as many women could get. So why did all this matter? Well, in a time when kingdoms were built and destroyed on the back of alliances, marriages were a crucial tool in the political toolbox. They could secure peace, expand territories, and solidify power. A well-placed marriage was like putting a "Do Not Disturb" sign on your kingdom. No knights in shining armor were needed, just a good lawyer and a hefty dowry. But let's not completely dismiss the occasional sparks of romance in this medieval marriage market. There are stories, like that of Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II, where love managed to sneak in through the back door, though often it was after the ink had dried on the agreement. In these rare instances, personal choice might have been a luxury, but it wasn't entirely impossible. It's just that, for most, the idea of marrying for love was as fantastical as a dragon sighting. In conclusion, medieval weddings were less about the couple and more about the community. They were the ultimate group project, where everyone from the parents to the local lord had a stake in the outcome. It was a world where marriage meant survival, prosperity, and power. A far cry from the sappy sonnets and stolen kisses of romantic lore, these unions were the medieval version of game theory in action. And while today's weddings have their fair share of drama, at least we can be grateful that the days of betrothing toddlers for political gain are firmly locked in history's dusty attic. And just when you thought medieval weddings couldn't get any more like a royal version of The Price is Right, enter the church, the ultimate wedding planner of the Middle Ages. Forget hiring a modern-day wedding coordinator who knows the best florists in town. This was about getting the ecclesiastical seal of approval. The church was the gatekeeper to wedded bliss, or at least to a legally recognized union. It was less about picking out color schemes, and more about making sure the paperwork was in order. In the medieval world, the church held the monopoly on both the spiritual and legal aspects of marriage. If you wanted to be recognized as married in the eyes of God and man, you had to follow the church's script. This wasn't your DIY backyard ceremony, it was a full-blown ecclesiastical affair. The church had a vested interest in marriage because it was not just a personal contract but a public institution. After all, marriages produced children, and children filled pews. Plus, the church got its slice of the pie in the form of fees for the service. Cha-ching. But let's not get too swept away by the idea of a romantic church wedding. The ceremony itself was more business transaction than fairy tale. Picture this. Instead of walking down the aisle to something akin to Pachelbel's canon, you might have been negotiating property titles and alliances. It was like attending a corporate board meeting, with less focus on floral arrangements and more on legal terms. The churchyard was the usual venue, a fact that's a bit of a buzzkill if you're expecting stained glass and candlelight. These ceremonies were short and to the point. The exchange of vows was the main event, where the couple would declare their intentions. It wasn't about love, it was about consent. As long as both parties said "I will," and there were witnesses to attest to it, the marriage was good to go. And speaking of witnesses, they were crucial in this whole affair. 2 or 3 people were needed to validate the transaction, ensuring no one could later claim they were hoodwinked into matrimony. And let's not forget the legal fireworks that came with a medieval marriage. It wasn't just 2 people tying the knot, it was an entanglement of property and power. The marriage contract outlined who got what, and believe me, it was as detailed as a prenup drafted by a team of lawyers. This was a time when the transfer of a plot of land or a castle could be part of the deal. Marriages could bring kingdoms together or divide them, and a poorly negotiated contract could lead to decades of feuding. In 1282, the marriage of Eleanor of Castile to Edward I wasn't just about uniting 2 people. It was about securing land in Gascony and maintaining peace between England and Spain. Talk about high stakes. In this era, social hierarchies were reflected in every detail of the wedding customs. If you were lucky enough to be born into nobility, your wedding was a public spectacle, an event for the history books. For the peasants, however, it was a much more subdued affair, often lacking the pomp and circumstance of their noble counterparts. The gap between the classes was as wide as the medieval moat, and weddings were no exception. Nobles might have a feast with enough food to feed a small army, while peasants might celebrate with a simple gathering of family and friends. It was a world where your social standing dictated not only who you married, but how you married. And if you think that's the end of the story, think again. Marriages in the medieval period also had legal implications that went far beyond the happy couple. They were tools for forging alliances, securing borders, and even waging wars. A marriage could mean the difference between peace and conflict, making every union a matter of national importance. It was like a medieval version of a diplomatic summit, with vows instead of treaties. So, while today we might dream of a wedding with a soundtrack of romantic ballads, in medieval times it was more like a symphony of political maneuvering and economic strategy. In a world where alliances could make or break a kingdom, marriage was the ultimate power move. And as we continue to unravel the layers of medieval matrimony, remember, behind every romantic legend lies a ledger of legalities and logistics that would make even the most seasoned wedding planner break into a sweat. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover in this grand tapestry of medieval wedding culture. And speaking of grand tapestries, let's unravel the threads of the medieval wedding feast, where the guest list could rival the population of a medieval hamlet, and the menu was a culinary arms race. A noble wedding was less about 2 people making goo-goo eyes at each other, and more like hosting a medieval Coachella, with food and entertainment that could make a bard weep with joy or indigestion. Let's start with the food, because who doesn't love a good medieval buffet? For the nobility, these feasts were an opportunity to flaunt wealth like a peacock in full display. The tables were laden with meat that would make a butcher blush. Think venison, boar, and even swan, because why not? In fact, at the marriage of Joan of Kent and the Black Prince in 1361, the guests reportedly devoured over 1,000 oxen and 5,000 sheep. That's right, folks, enough meat to stock a Game of Thrones episode or 2. But don't let your mouth water too much. This gastronomic extravaganza wasn't about taste so much as spectacle. Many of these dishes were heavily spiced and sweetened, more for the sake of showing off one's spice rack than to tantalize the taste buds. Spices like saffron and cinnamon were a status symbol, more valuable than gold in some cases, adding a dash of international flair to the otherwise monochromatic medieval palate. Now, if you're thinking peasant weddings were a sad sack of bread crusts and gruel, think again. While the fare was undoubtedly simpler, it was no less important. A peasant wedding might feature home-brewed ale, freshly baked bread, and locally sourced veggies. Not exactly a Michelin star menu, but it was hearty and far less likely to give you a case of medieval heartburn. The feast was a communal event, a gathering of friends and family sharing what they had. It was a reminder that even in the humblest of settings, food was the glue that held communities together. And then there's the entertainment. If you thought wedding DJs were a modern invention, let me introduce you to the medieval minstrel, the original Spotify playlist. They brought the tunes, while jugglers and acrobats provided the visual feast. Picture a Cirque du Soleil act, but with more juggling knives and fewer safety regulations. At some weddings, you might even encounter a troupe of mummers performing elaborate plays, complete with slapstick humour and moral lessons that would make a modern sitcom look tame. But wait, there's more. Epic storytelling was the Netflix binge of its day, with wandering bards recounting tales of chivalry and romance that could go on for hours or even days. These stories were the medieval version of a soap opera, complete with plot twists, villains and heroes whose adventures were as fantastical as they were improbable. It was entertainment with a capital E, designed to captivate and distract from the daily grind of medieval life. Now, why all this fuss, you ask? A noble wedding wasn't just about merging family trees. It was a display of power and prosperity. The grander the feast, the more it signaled to the world that here was a family worth watching. It was medieval Instagramming. Look at our wealth, our connections, our ability to throw a party that would make even the most stoic monk raise an eyebrow. In contrast, a peasant wedding feast, while more modest, was a celebration of community. It was less about flaunting wealth and more about unity, a chance for everyone to come together, share stories, and perhaps forget for a moment the harshness of daily life. It underscored an essential truth. Even in a world of rigid class divisions, everyone had a seat at the table, even if that table was a bit rickety and the menu a little less exotic. And let's not gloss over the economic context. These feasts, especially among the nobility, were an economic engine in their own right. They required goods, services, and labour, supporting a network of tradespeople from farmers to bakers to entertainers. A lavish wedding could infuse a small economy with enough coin to make it thrive, at least until the leftovers ran out. So, while today we might stress over seating charts and floral arrangements, medieval weddings were about showcasing power and fostering community ties with food and entertainment as the main acts. They were a testament to the human need to celebrate, to connect, and to mark life's milestones with a little pomp and a lot of circumstance. As we move forward, keep in mind that the medieval wedding wasn't just a ceremony or a party. It was a reflection of a society deeply conscious of status and community. And while today's weddings come with their own set of pressures, at least we're not expected to feed a small army or juggle flaming swords. But stay tuned, because there's more intrigue to uncover in the medieval marriage market. The curtain hasn't dropped yet on this historical drama. Speaking of historical dramas, let's step onto the medieval catwalk and strut our stuff through the world of wedding attire. Because what you wore on your big day could speak volumes, or at least a few chapters, about your social standing, wealth, and even political ambitions. Forget about the ubiquitous white wedding dress. In medieval times, brides were more likely to wear every colour under the sun, and possibly a few from beyond the rainbow. Here's the first mythbuster, the classic white wedding dress. A Victorian invention? Cue shocked gasps. Before Queen Victoria rocked her white gown in 1840, brides were more into flaunting their family's wealth and status. If you were a medieval bride, your dress would be all about the bling. Rich hues like deep red, blue and gold were the haute couture of the day, especially for the noble class. These colours weren't just eye-catching. They screamed, "I've got money, and I'm not afraid to show it." Dyes were expensive, and the brighter the colour, the richer you looked. Let's take our fashion time machine to 1302, when the 14-year-old Anne of Bohemia married King Richard II of England. Her outfit was a tapestry of luxurious fabrics and vibrant colours. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of wearing the entire Pantone palette. Her dress was made of imported silk, trimmed with ermine fur and embroidered with gold thread. The message was clear. This marriage was a big deal, and everyone needed to know it. But it wasn't just about the dress. Accessories played a starring role too. The medieval bride could be decked out in a headdress that looked like it belonged on a Christmas tree, complete with gold, pearls, and precious stones. These weren't just fashion statements, they were status symbols. Take the wedding of Margaret of York in 1468, where her headdress was so laden with jewels it could have doubled as a medieval disco ball. If you were lucky enough to snag an invite, you'd find yourself dazzled by the sparkle of more carrots than Bugs Bunny's pantry. Now, if you're picturing peasants in their Sunday best, think again. A peasant bride's attire was much more practical and, let's be honest, sensible. Her gown was usually made from homespun materials, like wool or linen, and in natural colours. Forget sequins and silk, this was about durability. The dress she wore on her wedding day might have to pull double duty as her regular church attire, and maybe even her burial shroud. Talk about getting your money's worth. But whether noble or peasant, the attire often carried symbolic weight. For example, the colour blue was associated with the Virgin Mary, and thus with purity and fidelity. So if a bride wore blue, it wasn't just because it matched her eyes, it was a nod to virtues that were supposed to be as much a part of her dowry as the cows and linens. Speaking of symbolism, let's not forget the veil. Today, it's often used for dramatic reveals and tearful aisle walks, but in the Middle Ages, it had a more pragmatic origin. It was a symbol of modesty and purity, but also a practical way to protect against evil spirits. You know, just in case they were lurking in the church rafters, waiting to crash the wedding. And here's another nugget for you, wedding rings. While today they're a staple, the exchange of rings was more sporadic back in the day. Rings were used, but they were less about romance and more about sealing the deal, literally. Their circular shape symbolized eternity, but also the binding contract between two families. The rich might have gone for gold and gems, while the common folk made do with simpler metals. Either way, it was a way to show that the deal was locked down tighter than a medieval castle door. Now, let's talk about customs, because medieval weddings were as much about rituals as they were about fashion. One particularly quirky tradition was the bedding ceremony. After the vows, the newlyweds were escorted to their marital bed by a procession of family and friends. Talk about awkward. This wasn't just for giggles, it was to ensure that the marriage was consummated and thus valid. Imagine your family cheering you on as you head into the boudoir. It's enough to make anyone long for privacy, or at least a thicker curtain. But before you get too scandalized, remember that medieval weddings were public affairs in every sense. The whole community often had a role, from the witnesses to the feasting guests and even those curious onlookers peeking in from the sidelines. It was a communal event, with everyone invested in the success of the union, if only to ensure peace and prosperity for the community. Yet, there's a darker side to all this pomp and circumstance. These customs were steeped in a culture of control, where personal choice was about as common as unicorn sightings. The rituals, the attire, the entire spectacle was a way to maintain the social order and reinforce the power dynamics of the day. Marriages were alliances, and the more elaborate they were, the more they cemented the status quo. So, while we might chuckle at the excesses and oddities of medieval wedding customs, they were serious business. They reflected a world where every stitch, every jewel, and every ritual was laden with meaning and intention. It was a time when the personal was very much political, and a wedding was the ultimate stage for displaying the intricate dance of power, wealth, and social harmony. As we prepare to delve further into this historical tapestry, remember that beneath the glittering surface of medieval wedding culture lies a complex web of social, economic, and political threads. Each ceremony was a microcosm of the larger medieval world, where every detail told a story, and every story was a piece of the grand design. So, stay tuned as we continue to unravel the threads of this fascinating period, because there's always more to discover in the rich fabric of history. And here's where we untangle the historical threads and stitch together the medieval past with our modern-day matrimonial tapestry. As we stand on the shoulders of history, it's clear that medieval wedding customs have left an indelible mark on today's nuptial practices. If you've ever wondered why your wedding invitation list feels like it's been dictated by a Game of Thrones-style family drama, or why there's pressure to pull off a Pinterest-perfect event, thank your medieval ancestors. First, let's address the elephant, or should I say, the peacock in the room, the wedding as a public spectacle. Medieval weddings were the original blockbusters, complete with a cast of thousands, and today's ceremonies aren't too far off. The guest lists that rival small-town populations, a nod to the days when weddings were less about the bride and groom and more about flaunting family connections. We still see echoes in the way weddings are used to cement social networks, though now it's more about who sits next to whom at the reception rather than securing a political alliance. Now, let's talk about the economics, because who doesn't love a good financial subplot? Back then, a dowry was the medieval equivalent of a Wall Street investment portfolio. And while today's prenups and wedding gifts can't quite match the 450,000 gold francs of Valentina Visconti's dowry, the underlying principle remains. Marriages still involve negotiations. Just now, it's less about land and livestock and more about who gets the good china. It's fascinating how the money talk has evolved from overt transactions to a more subtle dance of financial planning and gift registries. As for the Church's role, while the ecclesiastical monopoly on marriage ceremonies has loosened, its legacy lingers. The idea of a formal ceremony with vows and witnesses is a direct descendant of medieval ecclesiastical regulations. The Church, in its heyday, was the original wedding planner, ensuring that unions were recognized both legally and spiritually. Today, even in secular ceremonies, we see the same framework, a structured event with a nod to tradition and a hefty dose of ritual. And let's not forget the outfits. While no one is strutting down the aisle in ermine-trimmed gowns today, or if they are, they might want to reconsider, the emphasis on wedding attire as a symbol of status has stood the test of time. The white dress may have been a Victorian invention, but the idea of wearing something special, something that telegraphs status and taste, is as medieval as it gets. Now, what about the evolution from transactional arrangements to partnerships based on love? This is where things get truly interesting. Back in the day, marrying for love was about as common as a dragon sighting, and not the CGI kind. Love was considered a bonus, not a prerequisite. Fast forward to today, and love has taken center stage in the marriage narrative. Yet, the echoes of the past remain. While we cherish the romantic ideal, practical considerations, like financial stability and family dynamics, still play a role. It's as if we've layered love on top of a foundation built on centuries of economic and social strategy. The heart wants what it wants, but the wallet and family still get a vote. So, what would a medieval bride or groom think of our modern weddings? Picture them wandering into a contemporary ceremony, eyes wide as saucers at the sight of choreographed first dances and photo booths. They'd probably marvel at the absence of livestock negotiations and cheer at the open bar. And as they watched couples exchange vows for love rather than land, they might smile at how far we've come, or shake their heads at what they'd see as frivolity. After all, why waste time on personal affection when there's a perfectly good alliance to be made with that second cousin twice removed? In wrapping up, medieval weddings were both a reflection and a reinforcement of the societal norms of their time, much like our own. They were public declarations of power and wealth, social contracts wrapped in silk and spice. Today, while the trappings have changed, the core elements, the spectacle, the economics, the social implications remain. We've added love to the equation, but the echoes of the past still resonate. As we dance awkwardly around the floor to our chosen first dance song, it's worth remembering that marriage has always been both a deeply personal union and a public declaration. It's a testament to how far we've come, yet a reminder of where we started. And there you have it, the medieval wedding, a kaleidoscope of colour, a cacophony of commerce, and a cornerstone of community. As you reflect on these fascinating traditions, remember that each ring exchanged, each vow spoken, carries with it the weight of history. As we step into our own futures, perhaps we'll carry a little more appreciation for those medieval matchmakers who, in their quest for alliances and dowries, unknowingly laid the foundation for the love stories of today. In the vibrant whirlwind that was early 20th century Mexico, Frida Kahlo arrived on the scene, bursting forth with the kind of energy that makes you think, well, this is going to be interesting. Born on July 6, 1907, in the quaint yet chaotic neighborhood of Coyoacán, Mexico City, Frida was part of a world that was undergoing its own dramatic makeover. Picture a young girl growing up amidst the aftershocks of a revolution, where the air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and the tantalizing promise of change. The Mexican Revolution kicked off in 1910, when Frida was just a toddler, and while most kids were learning their ABCs, Frida was learning about upheaval. As Pancho Villa, and Emiliano Zapata were galloping through the pages of her country's history books. Frida's father, Guillermo Kahlo, was a German photographer with a penchant for capturing the soul of the Mexican landscape, which was no small feat considering the landscape had a habit of moving beneath his feet. Her mother, Matilde Calderón y González, was of indigenous and Spanish descent, and together they created a household that was as culturally rich as a tamale, with a side of sauerkraut. Frida had a childhood that was, let's say, less than idyllic. At 6, she was hit with polio, a disease that decided it was time to play favourites with her right leg, leaving it thinner than the left. Kids being kids, her classmates dubbed her Frida la Coja, or Frida the Cripple, because empathy was not yet a required subject in schools. But if you think a little thing like polio was going to slow her down, you clearly haven't met Frida. She was more like a force of nature than a child, riding bikes, playing soccer, and even wrestling, activities that would make even the sturdiest of kids wince. Frida was the kind of fierce that took life's challenges and turned them into a game of try me. If life handed her lemons, she wouldn't just make lemonade, she'd make a lemonade stand and turn it into a thriving business, complete with a marketing plan and a catchy jingle. Now, let's talk about the bus accident. You know, the one that changed everything, and not in the I found $1 on the street way, but in the I survived a cataclysmic event that would make Hercules sweat way. It was September 17, 1925, a day that started like any other but ended in a way that would make even the toughest among us consider a career change to professional bed rest. Frida was just 18, riding a bus with her then-boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arias. The day was humming along until the bus collided with a streetcar. The impact was catastrophic, a word here meaning absolute nightmare. Frida was impaled by a handrail, her spine and pelvis were broken in several places, and, for a bit of added insult, she suffered a crushed foot and shoulder. You might be wondering how anyone could find humour in such a calamity, but Frida was a master at turning tragedy into art, with a side of dark humour. The accident left her bedridden for months, during which she started painting, because what else do you do when you're wrapped up like a mummy and bored out of your mind? Her mother even rigged up an easel that allowed her to paint while lying down. Talk about a DIY project with high stakes. Now, while Frida was turning pain into portraits, Mexico was shaking off the dust of its own revolution. The 1920s were a time of rebuilding and redefining national identity, and Frida was soaking it all up. The country was like a teenager trying on different personas, and Frida, with her unique blend of European and indigenous heritage, was the perfect poster child for this new Mexico. The political climate was as hot as a jalapeno, with the government promoting a sense of nationalism that embraced its mestizo identity, a blend of indigenous and European roots. Frida's own political views were as fiery as her palate. She joined the Young Communist League and the Mexican Communist Party, throwing herself into the political debates of the time with the kind of fervour usually reserved for sports fans or people arguing on the internet. Her art would later reflect this passion, with vibrant colours and themes that celebrated Mexican culture and critiqued the political status quo. Frida Kahlo's early life was nothing short of a cosmic joke, with the universe handing her one calamity after another, and her responding with a defiant brushstroke and a sardonic grin. While most are content to let fate draw the lines, Frida grabbed the paintbrush and started drawing her own. Her life was a vivid tapestry woven with threads of pain, resilience, and the kind of audacity that makes legends. And just like that, we're only getting started on the kaleidoscopic journey that was Frida Kahlo's life. Stay tuned, because the colours are only going to get brighter and the stories even more compelling. Frida Kahlo, still recovering and already wielding a paintbrush like a wand, was about to cast her first spell on the art world. Picture the scene. A woman who turned her hospital bed into an art studio was now ready to transform the canvas of life itself. Enter Diego Rivera, stage left, a man whose presence was as loud as his murals. Diego was a celebrated painter, his reputation as large as his waistline, and his ego probably needed its own postal code. When Frida first approached him in 1928 to critique her work, it wasn't just a meeting of minds. It was the kind of explosive encounter that makes fireworks look like damp matches. Frida, with her unflinching gaze and those famous eyebrows that could have a conversation all their own, was already a force to be reckoned with. Diego, meanwhile, was busy painting murals in the National Preparatory School, a cultural hotbed where Frida herself had once been a student. The school was a microcosm of post-revolutionary Mexico, full of political debates and artistic fervour. It was here that Frida, still fresh from her self-imposed artistic boot camp, decided to gatecrash Diego's world. Now, let's talk relationships, because Frida and Diego's was the kind that makes reality TV producers salivate. Forget that fairy tale romance. This was more like a telenovela with a palette. They married in 1929, and it was immediately clear that their partnership was anything but perfect. Theirs was a marriage that saw more turmoil than a soap opera, with affairs, arguments, and reconciliations that would have left Shakespeare's characters begging for a breather. Imagine a love story written in oil paints and sharp words, where canvases were slashed as often as feelings were hurt. But despite, or maybe because of, the chaos, their relationship was a creative powerhouse. Frida and Diego fueled each other's artistic fires, even if they sometimes scorched each other in the process. Diego's influence on Frida's work was undeniable. He encouraged her to embrace Mexican folk art and incorporate it into her own unique style. Her paintings became vibrant, haunting, and unmistakably hers, infused with the colors and textures of Mexican culture. And while Diego's murals were the talk of the town, Frida's intimate portraits spoke in whispers that echoed across gallery walls. The myth of their perfect artistic partnership is about as real as a unicorn wearing a sombrero. Sure, they inspired each other, but their collaboration was often more about managing egos than mixing paints. Diego, ever the charmer, had a penchant for dalliances, a fact that Frida handled with a stoicism that would make a poker player proud. She, too, had her share of romantic escapades, and the two often navigated their entangled lives like a game of emotional chess. It was messy, it was volatile, and it was, in its own way, a testament to the complexity of human relationships. Now let's fast forward to 1938, when Frida's art made it to the Big Apple. Her first solo exhibition in New York was held at the Julian Levy Gallery, a venue known for showcasing surrealist art that bent reality like a pretzel. Frida, always one to make an entrance, arrived with her unmistakable flair. Her paintings, filled with raw emotion and vibrant colors, stood out in a city where skyscrapers cast long shadows and art was often as abstract as a Jackson Pollock splatter. But here's where the cultural clash comes into play. Frida, with her vivid Mexican identity, was like a piñata in a room full of minimalist art. New Yorkers, known for their love of the avant-garde, were taken aback by the raw honesty of her work. Reviews of the exhibition were mixed. Some critics hailed her as a genius, while others couldn't quite wrap their heads around her personal style. The New York art scene, accustomed to the detached coolness of European modernism, was not entirely ready for Frida's unapologetic celebration of her Mexican roots and personal pain. Financial realities also reared their unsentimental heads. While Frida's work was gaining attention, it wasn't exactly flying off the walls like hotcakes. The economic context of the time was a harsh backdrop. The Great Depression had left wallets thin and appetites for new art even thinner. Despite the initial buzz, Frida sold only a few paintings, including 2 to the actor Edward G. Robinson, who bought them for a modest $200 each, a small fortune or a pittance, depending on which side of the gallery you were standing. But the exhibition was more than just a financial transaction. It was a cultural exchange that saw Frida's work resonate with those who understood the language of pain, resilience, and identity. Her time in New York was a whirlwind, filled with a mix of glamour and grit. She mingled with the likes of Georgia O'Keeffe and Marcel Duchamp, sipping cocktails and exchanging ideas, all while navigating a foreign land with her characteristic bravado. Frida's New York adventure was a microcosm of her life, a blend of triumphs and trials that left an indelible mark on the art world. She returned to Mexico with a heightened sense of her own identity and a renewed commitment to her craft. Her art continued to evolve, reflecting her personal experiences and the broader cultural tapestry of her homeland. The stage was set for the next chapter in Frida Kahlo's extraordinary journey, one that would see her continue to defy conventions and redefine what it meant to be an artist in a world that was still learning to embrace the unconventional. As we leave Frida amidst the bustling streets and towering skyscrapers of New York, remember that her story is far from over. The canvas of her life is still being painted, each brushstroke more daring than the last. Stay tuned, because there's more to come in the vibrant, unpredictable saga of Frida Kahlo. Frida Kahlo, fresh from her New York escapade and back on home turf, was about to dive headfirst into the swirling, heady waters of political expression. It was the 1930s, a time when the world was doing its best impression of a volcano, bubbling with ideologies, ready to erupt at any moment. Communism, that hot-button word that could start a bar fight faster than you could say dialectical materialism, was gaining traction, and Frida had front-row seats to the action. Now, if you thought Frida's art was bold before, just wait till politics got involved. Her paintings became a vibrant tapestry where revolutionary fervour and personal narrative intertwined like a pair of dancers who couldn't quite stay in step. You see, Frida was more than just a passive observer. She was an active participant in the political scene, and her canvases were her manifesto. Her involvement with the Mexican Communist Party wasn't a half-hearted dabble. It was a full-throttle dive into the ideological deep end. Let's talk about Leon Trotsky. Yes, that Leon Trotsky, the Russian revolutionary with a penchant for ice picks and a knack for getting on Joseph Stalin's last nerve. Exiled from the Soviet Union and bouncing from country to country like a revolutionary pinball, Trotsky eventually landed in Mexico, where Frida and Diego opened their home to him in 1937. If you're picturing a scene from a spy thriller, you're not far off, except this one featured less espionage and more awkward dinner parties. Trotsky's stay at the Kahlo Rivera residence was a whirlwind of political discussion, clandestine meetings, and, because reality loves a plot twist, a rumoured affair between Trotsky and Frida. Yes, folks, even revolutionaries had personal lives that would give a soap opera writer pause. This alleged liaison was brief, but it added another spicy chapter to Frida's already colourful biography. It's worth noting that while Trotsky was busy dodging Stalin's wrath, Frida was busy using her art as a platform to critique the political landscape, blending personal and political in a way that only she could. Frida's painting Self-Portrait with Stalin, created during this tumultuous period, is a testament to her complex political identity. It shows her admiration for Stalin, despite the dictator's rather unflattering track record. This is where we need to pump the brakes on the romanticized view of Frida's activism. Was she an ardent communist? Yes. Did her political alignments sometimes clash with the harsh realities of the figures she admired? Also yes. It's easy to paint her as a revolutionary icon, but the truth is more nuanced, as it often is with people who lived in a world painted in shades of grey rather than black and white. Now, let's debunk a myth or two. Frida's activism is often portrayed as unwavering and pristine, but the reality was more akin to a Jackson Pollock painting, messy, layered, and open to interpretation. Her support for communism stemmed from a deep desire for social justice and equality, but it also coexisted with a pragmatic understanding of the political landscape. She wasn't marching in lockstep with every communist decree, but was instead weaving her own thread through the ideological fabric of her time. Her art during this era became a powerful medium of political satire. Take My Dress Hangs There, painted in 1933, which served as a critique of American capitalism. The painting features a landscape cluttered with symbols of American industry and wealth, while a Mexican dress, Frida's dress, hangs in the middle, a poignant symbol of cultural identity caught in the crossfire of economic disparity. It was a visual jab at the materialism she witnessed during her stint in the United States, a reminder that beneath the glitz of skyscrapers lay a society grappling with inequality. Frida's political art wasn't just about aligning with a party, it was about sparking conversation, asking uncomfortable questions, and, at times, poking the proverbial bear. She had a knack for satire that could make even the most stoic revolutionary crack a smile, or at least a frown of begrudging respect. Her ability to encapsulate complex political themes in a single image was a talent that few could match, making her work both a visual feast and a cerebral challenge. As the 1940s rolled in, Frida's health took a nosedive, but her political zeal remained steadfast. She continued to paint, albeit with increasing difficulty, and her art was imbued with an urgency that mirrored the world's chaotic dance around the brink of war. Her personal struggles, physical pain, emotional turmoil, and political disillusionment were all laid bare on her canvases, a testament to her relentless pursuit of truth, however uncomfortable it might be. In the grand tapestry of history, Frida Kahlo is often seen as a solitary figure, the lone genius wielding a paintbrush against the backdrop of a turbulent world. But in reality, she was interconnected with the political and social movements of her time, not just as a participant, but as a provocateur. Her activism was not the sanitized version that history sometimes prefers, but a raw, complex interplay of ideals and realities, a dance between the personal and the political. As we wrap up this chapter, remember that Frida's story is still unfolding. Her art, her activism, and her audacity continue to inspire, provoke, and challenge. The canvas is far from finished, and there are still brushstrokes left to explore in the vibrant, unpredictable saga of Frida Kahlo. Stay tuned, because the colours are only going to get brighter and the stories even more compelling. Frida Kahlo's life was a kaleidoscope of colour, culture, and contradiction, and as the 1940s unfolded, it was also a relentless battleground of pain and perseverance. While her canvases sang with vibrant hues, her body was a symphony of suffering, each note a reminder of her physical struggles. Let's dive into the myths and realities of Frida's health, a topic that has been romanticized to the point of folklore, yet remains grounded in the harsh truths of her medical history. Frida's health issues started early and often, like an overly enthusiastic DJ who just couldn't stop hitting the replay button. The polio at age 6 gave her a limp, but the 1925 bus accident was the headliner that really stole the show. Her injuries were catastrophic, a spine fractured in 3 places, a broken collarbone, ribs and pelvis, and a right leg that seemed to be in a constant state of disrepair. This wasn't just a bad day, it was a front-row seat to a lifetime of chronic pain. Here's the thing, Frida didn't just endure, she defied. Her art became a canvas of catharsis, a vivid diary where brushes replaced pens. She painted self-portraits, not out of vanity, but out of necessity. I paint myself because I am so often alone, and because I am the subject I know best. These images weren't just about capturing her likeness, they were a deep dive into the psyche of a woman who spent more time with her own reflection than most. People spend online shopping. As she famously said, "Now, let's tackle a myth that tends to cling to Frida's legacy like a particularly stubborn piece of gum." There's this romantic notion that Frida's pain somehow made her art more profound, as if suffering were the secret ingredient to creativity. But the reality is much grimmer. Her pain was not a muse. It was a constant, unwelcome companion that she had to battle every single day. The fact that she painted through it is not a testament to the inspirational power of agony, but to her sheer willpower and grit. Her self-portraits often depicted her physical and emotional pain with unflinching candor. In The Broken Column, painted in 1944, Frida portrays herself as a human earthquake. Her body split open, her spine replaced by a crumbling ionic column. It's a visual manifesto of her internal fracture, each brushstroke a declaration of resilience wrapped in vulnerability. This is not just art, this is Frida screaming into the void, demanding to be heard, seen and understood. And then there's Without Hope, painted in 1945, where Frida is bedridden, forcibly fed by a monstrous funnel of food. The painting is a visceral expression of her helplessness and frustration, a stark reminder that her life was often dictated by her medical needs rather than her desires. It's art that punches you in the gut, then whispers in your ear, "This is what it means to endure." Frida's medical history reads like a cautionary tale for anyone who ever thought, how bad could it be? After the bus accident, she underwent at least 30 surgical procedures, each one a gamble with dice loaded in favor of pain. She wore corsets, not for fashion, but for support, often painting them with vibrant designs because if life hands you lemons, you might as well paint them red and blue. The economic context of Frida's health was as brutal as her injuries. Mexico in the 1940s wasn't exactly known for its cutting-edge medical technology. Frida's treatments were costly, and while Diego Rivera's fame brought in some financial stability, it wasn't enough to cushion the constant blow of medical expenses. Her health was a luxury she couldn't afford, yet she paid the price every day. Her determination to create amidst adversity was nothing short of Herculean. Imagine painting with a brush in one hand and a prescription in the other, every stroke a testament to the battle raging within. Frida's art was her rebellion against a body that refused to cooperate, a declaration that she was more than the sum of her ailments. Let's debunk another myth while we're at it, the notion that Frida's art was solely about her pain. Yes, her suffering was a significant theme, But it was not the entire story. Her paintings were also celebrations of life, culture, and identity. They were love letters to Mexico, a country as vibrant and tumultuous as its most famous artist. They were political statements, personal narratives, and visual diaries all rolled into one complex, beautiful package. Frida's iconic self-portraits served as both mirrors and windows, reflecting her inner turmoil while offering a glimpse into the broader cultural and political landscape of her time. They were not just about the pain she felt, but the identity she forged despite it. Her art was her voice, and it spoke volumes in a world that often preferred silence. As Frida's health continued to decline, her art evolved, becoming more introspective and raw. The late 1940s and early 1950s saw her producing works that were intimate and haunting, each piece a poignant reminder of her struggles and triumphs. Her paintings were her legacy, a vivid tapestry of resilience and defiance that continues to inspire and challenge us even today. So as we pause in Frida's story, remember that her journey was not one of unrelenting darkness, but of vibrant colour and unyielding spirit. Her life was a dance on the edge of a precipice, each step a testament to her courage and creativity. Stay tuned, because Frida's story is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be just as compelling as the last. As we pivot from the canvas of Frida Kahlo's life to the broader gallery of her legacy, it's time to address the elephant in the room, or rather, the eyebrow in the room. Frida's posthumous rise to stardom is nothing short of meteoric. Picture this: a woman whose art barely whispered in her lifetime, suddenly roaring into the cultural zeitgeist like a rock star with a paintbrush. Yet, as her image is plastered across everything from coffee mugs to socks, we must ask, does this modern portrayal truly align with the real Frida, or has her story been twisted into something more marketable than truthful? Frida passed away in 1954, leaving behind a body of work that was as much a visual diary as a collection of art. Her death marked the end of an era, but it wasn't until the 1970s and 80s that her star began to rise. Why the delay? Well, the art world was having a bit of its own identity crisis, finally ready to embrace artists who didn't fit into the neat little boxes of their predecessors. Enter the feminist art movement, which latched onto Frida as an icon of unapologetic self-expression and defiance against patriarchal norms. Her paintings, which had once been seen as too raw or too personal, suddenly resonated with a generation eager to break free from societal constraints. By the time the 1990s rolled around, Frida was on the fast track to becoming a household name. A 1983 biography by Hayden Herrera, aptly titled Frida, a biography of Frida Kahlo, catapulted her into the mainstream, painting a picture of a woman who was both a victim of circumstance and a master of her own destiny. This book was the catalyst that turned curiosity into obsession, sparking a Frida frenzy that saw her likeness emblazoned on everything from T-shirts to tequila bottles. And let's not forget the 2002 film Frida, starring Salma Hayek, which brought her story to an even wider audience, blending Hollywood glam with historical fiction. But here's where the story gets as tangled as Frida and Diego's love life. While the commercialization of her image has made her a global phenomenon, it's also sanded down some of the rough edges that made her so compelling. The unibrow, the traditional Tijuana dresses, the flowers in her hair. They've become symbols of empowerment, yes, but also of a sanitized version of Frida that conveniently sidesteps the darker, more complex aspects of her life. Her image has been commodified to the point where it's often easier to find a Frida tote bag than it is to engage with the provocative themes of suffering, identity, and politics that her art so vividly explored. This isn't to say that the romanticized version of Frida doesn't have its charms. After all, who doesn't love a good underdog story, especially one wrapped in vibrant colors and cultural pride? But the real Frida was more than just an icon of resilience. She was a woman of contradictions, a revolutionary who wasn't afraid to embrace her flaws while challenging the status quo. The economic context of Frida's rise to posthumous fame is as fascinating as it is ironic. During her lifetime, she struggled to sell her work and make ends meet. Fast forward to today, and her paintings have fetched millions at auction. In 2006, her piece, Roots, sold for $5.6 million at Sotheby's, setting a record for Latin American art. It's a jaw-dropping figure that underscores just how far her star has risen. but it also raises questions about the commercial machine that now churns out Frida merchandise faster than you can say, "Viva la vida." Let's take a moment to debunk the myth that Frida's story has been universally uplifting. The truth is, the commercialization of her image sometimes glosses over the harsh realities of her life, her health struggles, her tumultuous marriage, her political affiliations. These are often overshadowed by the more palatable narrative of a strong, independent woman who overcame adversity. It's a narrative that sells, but it doesn't always tell the whole story. Frida's cultural impact today is undeniable. She is a beacon of inspiration for artists, feminists, and free spirits everywhere. A symbol of the power of personal expression and the courage to stand out in a world that often demands conformity. Her art continues to resonate, not just because of its aesthetic appeal, but because of its raw honesty and emotional depth. Her ability to capture the complexities of identity and the human condition is what makes her work timeless, an eternal conversation starter that challenges viewers to look beyond the surface. In the end, Frida Kahlo's legacy is a mosaic of triumphs and trials, a vivid tapestry woven with threads of humor and pathos. Her story is both a cautionary tale about the perils of commercialization and a testament to the enduring power of art to provoke, inspire, and transform. As we wrap up this journey through the life and legacy of Frida Kahlo, let's remember her not just as a cultural icon, but as a complex, multifaceted woman whose spirit defied easy categorization. So there you have it, folks. Frida's life was a masterpiece, painted with bold strokes and unflinching honesty, a symphony of color and contradiction that continues to captivate and challenge us today. Her legacy is secure, not just on the walls of galleries, but in the hearts and minds of those who dare to dream as she did. And as you drift off to sleep with these new insights tucked away, remember that the story of Frida Kahlo is far more than the sum of its parts. It's a reminder that art, like life, is most vibrant when it dares to defy the ordinary. You're standing knee-deep in the briny muck of a 17th century Dutch fishing village, where the morning air is crisp and filled with the unmistakable scent of ambition and, well, a bit of fish guts. Welcome to the golden age of the Netherlands, the time when these little villages were the beating heart of Europe's economic engine, and herring was the greasy cog that kept it all running. Forget romanticized paintings of well-fed merchants and tulip mania. This era was built on the backs of fishermen who risked it all on the high seas. Your day starts before the sun even thinks about peeking over the horizon. Around 4 a.m. the village is already humming with activity. You can hear the clanking of wooden shoes on cobblestones as fishermen gather, sharing gruff greetings and swigs of something strong enough to put hair on your chest, or maybe take it off. Sleep is a luxury, but the sea waits for no one. You, my friend, are about to embark on a day that's as gritty as the day's catch. The boats, called buses, are your ticket to prosperity or ruin. A mid-sized herring bus might set you back a cool 1,000 guilders, a small fortune when you consider that a skilled labourer would be lucky to earn 200 guilders a year, and that's just the boat itself. The nets, sails, ropes, and a crew willing to risk life and limb add up quickly. It's an investment, a gamble, and sometimes just pure madness. The tools of your trade are simple but effective. Nets made of flax, sometimes stretching over 1,000 metres, are your bread and butter. They're heavy, cumbersome, and have a knack for tangling at the worst possible moment. And don't forget the barrels. Countless barrels packed with salt, ready to preserve the herring the moment they hit the deck. Salt, by the way, isn't cheap. You're looking at 50 to 100 guilders per ton, and you need tons of it. It's a small price to pay when the alternative is rotting fish and empty pockets. The harbour itself is a symphony of chaos. The calls of merchants haggling over prices mix with the cries of gulls, all of them competing for the best morsels. Tax collectors, those eternal party poopers, make their rounds, ensuring everyone pays their share to the Dutch state. Taxes, by the way, aren't just an afterthought, they're a constant companion. Expect to fork over a good chunk of your profits, up to 10% of the value of your catch, to keep the wheels of government greased. But don't let the numbers fool you into thinking it's all drudgery. There's a certain camaraderie among the fishermen. You share in each other's triumphs and failures, and when the weather turns, you huddle together, swapping stories that blur the lines between truth and sea-tossed fiction. The sea, after all, is a fickle mistress. She gives and she takes, often in the same day. As you board your boat, the wooden planks creaking underfoot, you're hit with a fresh wave of salty air. The sails are hoisted, and with a few terse orders, you're off. The coastline fades into the distance, replaced by the endless horizon and the promise of a full net. Here's a fun fact to chew on while you're rocking with the waves. The Dutch herring industry at this time was so efficient that it practically invented capitalism. Seriously. The success of these fisheries fueled not only the local economy, but also the coffers of the Dutch East India Company, the world's first multinational corporation. So next time you hear about the wonders of the free market, remember that it all began with a bunch of Dutch guys in boats battling the North Sea. The sea is alive around you. Schools of herrings swim beneath, so thick you could practically walk on them, or at least that's what the old-timers claim. You cast your nets and wait, the anticipation tingling in the air. It's a waiting game, filled with the sounds of creaking wood and the occasional groan of your shipmates. They say patience is a virtue, but out here it's a necessity. When the nets are finally hauled in, the deck erupts in a flurry of activity. The crew moves with practiced precision, gutting and salting the herring at lightning speed. The smell is intense, a heady mix of salt, sea, and fish that clings to your clothes and your skin. It's work that demands both speed and skill, and it's a point of pride to do it well. As the barrels fill, there's a palpable sense of accomplishment. Each fish is another step toward paying off that expensive boat, those costly nets, and perhaps putting a little extra in your pocket for the winter months. The return trip is quieter, the crew exhausted but satisfied. You watch the sun dip below the horizon as the village comes back into view, cloaked in the soft hues of twilight. Back in the harbour, the scene has shifted. The market is alive with activity as merchants haggle over the day's catch, each trying to outwit the other. You unload your haul, grateful for a successful trip and already planning the next one. As you finally head home, your pockets a little heavier. You take a moment to breathe in the salty air. This life isn't for everyone, but for you, it's more than just a job. It's a connection to the sea, the village, and the countless others who fish these waters. You'll rise before dawn again tomorrow, ready to face whatever the sea throws your way. After all, in this world, it's not just about surviving, it's about thriving against the odds. The sea, my friend, is a capricious partner, a mix of beauty and brutality that few can stomach. And the Dutch, bless their wooden shoes, knew how to dance with her like nobody else. But before you get swept away by the romance of it all, let's talk about the gritty details of life on a 17th century herring bus. These boats were more than just floating fish factories, they were marvels of maritime engineering and microcosms of societal order. First things first, the herring bus itself. A typical vessel measured about 20 metres long and was built to withstand the North Sea's notorious mood swings. That's roughly the length of 3 giraffes laid end to end, in case you're wondering. These ships weren't just slacked together with driftwood and hope, they were crafted from stout oak, a luxury in a world where trees were more than just background scenery. And the cost? A whopping 1,000 guilders, remember? That wasn't just pocket change, it was a testament to the financial stakes involved. Now, let's talk navigation. Forget GPS and radar. These seafarers relied on the stars, the sun, and a fair bit of instinct. The Dutch were pioneers of using the cross staff, an ingenious little device that looked like a T-shaped ruler and helped measure the angle between the horizon and a celestial body. It's like doing trigonometry while balancing on a seesaw in a hurricane. You can bet they earned every fish they caught. Life on board was no pleasure cruise. The hierarchy among fishermen was as rigid as the ship's masts. At the top was the skipper, the captain of this wooden ark whose word was law. Beneath them were the mates, and, finally, the deckhands, each with their own set of responsibilities. The skipper wasn't just a figurehead. He was the decision-maker, the navigator, and often the disciplinarian. The mates had the unenviable task of overseeing the crew, ensuring that every fish was caught, gutted, and salted to perfection. Deckhands did the grunt work, their hands perpetually slick with scales and salt. The economic stakes were high, my friend. The great fishery, as it was known, was a cornerstone of the Dutch economy. It wasn't just about feeding a nation, it was about trading across Europe. Herring, salted and packed into barrels, was shipped far and wide from the bustling markets of London to the frozen ports of the Baltic. This wasn't just fish, it was liquid gold. The Dutch, ever the savvy traders, turned these slippery creatures into a currency that fueled their burgeoning empire. But it wasn't just about the money. The sea was a harsh employer, demanding and unforgiving. Storms could rise out of nowhere, turning calm waters into a boiling cauldron of chaos. And let's not forget the ever-present threat of piracy. Yes, your friendly neighbourhood privateers had a knack for making off with a ship's entire catch, leaving the crew with nothing but empty nets and a story to tell. In this line of work, the sea could make you or break you, sometimes in the span of a single voyage. Despite the hardships, there was a certain camaraderie that developed among the crew. After all, when you're sharing a cramped space with a dozen other souls, you learn to get along, or at least tolerate each other. Stories were swapped, legends were born, and friendships forged in the salty air. It was a rough life, but there was a raw beauty to it, a connection to the natural world that few on land could comprehend. As for the Dutch economy, let's not kid ourselves. The herring industry was a linchpin, a vital component of a wider economic machine. It wasn't just about fish, it was about power, influence, and the ability to leverage natural resources into geopolitical might. The Dutch were masters of this game, using their maritime prowess to control trade routes and dominate markets. They understood the value of their catch, not just in terms of guilders, but in terms of global reach. So, as you stand on the deck of this herring bus, with the wind in your hair and the taste of salt on your lips, remember that you're part of a grand tradition. You're not just a fisherman, you're a player in a global drama, a cog in a machine that turned the Netherlands into a powerhouse of trade and industry. And while the romance of the sea is undeniable, it's the harsh realities that make this story truly compelling. As the sun sets over the horizon and the first stars begin to appear, you can't help but feel a sense of awe. The sea is a harsh mistress, but she's also a generous one, offering riches to those brave enough to seek them. As you step off the boat, your boots squelching on the cobblestones of the harbour side, you're greeted by a scene that's equal parts chaos and commerce, a place where fish meets finance in a frenetic dance. The marketplace is a riot of sound and colour, a cacophony of shouting merchants, bickering buyers, and the ever-present squawk of seagulls, all vying for their piece of the maritime pie. It's not quite the serene tableau of a Vermeer painting, but it's the lifeblood of a nation that's turned fish into fortune. Now, let's set the record straight about this marketplace. If you're imagining a quaint setup where fishermen and merchants engage in a friendly game of haggling, think again. The truth is, it's more cutthroat than a swordfish competition. The marketplace was a battleground where merchants, often backed by powerful guilds, wielded influence like a cudgel. These guilds weren't just social clubs. They were the puppet masters of the economic stage, pulling strings and setting prices, ensuring that the market swung in their favour. Take, for instance, the Fishers' Guild of Amsterdam, an organisation so powerful it could make or break a fisherman's season. Think of them as the original corporate lobbyists with a dash of medieval flair. They ensured that the rules of trade ran like a well-oiled machine, or at least a machine that favoured their members. Their regulations dictated everything from the quality of the catch to the salt levels in the barrels. If you wanted a piece of the action, you had to play by their rules. This was not a laissez-faire free-for-all, it was a precisely choreographed economic dance. But don't let the guilds take all the credit or blame. The merchants themselves were no slouches. They were the sharks in this watery business ecosystem, always on the lookout for the best catch at the lowest price. Your typical fish merchant in the 17th century was a savvy operator, well versed in the art of negotiation. They weren't just buying fish. They were investing in a product that had to be sold across Europe's markets, from the bustling streets of Paris to the frozen alleys of Moscow. Herring wasn't just a meal, it was a commodity, a staple that fueled armies and fed cities. And speaking of commodities, let's talk numbers. A single barrel of salted herring could fetch up to 30 guilders, a tidy sum at a time when a loaf of bread cost mere stuivers, the Dutch equivalent of pennies. Multiply that by hundreds or even thousands of barrels, and you start to see why this industry was a cornerstone of the Dutch economy. But before you get wide-eyed at the thought of riches, remember that those profits were often nibbled away by taxes, fees, and the ever-present cost of doing business with guilds and merchants who knew their worth. Now, about those trade networks. The Dutch were the original globetrotters of commerce, their ships plying the waters of Europe and beyond, spreading the gospel of herring far and wide. Dutch traders didn't just sell fish, they sold an idea, a reliable, long-lasting food source that could sustain armies and populations alike. Their trade routes were the veins through which the lifeblood of the Dutch economy flowed, connecting ports like Amsterdam and Rotterdam to far-flung markets. But let's not get too romantic about these traders as globe-trotting heroes. The reality was more about grit than glamour. For every ship that returned with a hold full of gold, there were many that didn't make it back at all, felled by storms, pirates, or the merciless sea. Trade was risky business, and the profits were hard won. These merchants had to be tough, resilient, and a little bit ruthless, traits that served them well in an era defined by competition and conquest. So, what's the takeaway from this salty saga? Simply put, the marketplace was a microcosm of the broader economic and political forces at play. It was a place where fortunes could be made or lost in the blink of an eye, where the stakes were high and the players were as varied as the catch of the day. The guilds, merchants, and fishermen were all part of a vast, interconnected system that transcended borders and cultures, powered by the humble herring. As you navigate the market, dodging the occasional fish gut and the sharp elbows of a determined buyer, you can't help but marvel at the sheer audacity of it all. This wasn't just about selling fish. It was about crafting an empire, one barrel at a time. The Dutch, with their indomitable spirit and savvy business sense, had turned the simple act of fishing into a complex ballet of trade, negotiation, and economic might. Yet, despite the grandeur of it all, the marketplace remained a gritty, no-nonsense affair. It was a place where the romance of the sea met the reality of commerce, where the sweet scent of opportunity mingled with the bracing aroma of salt and fish. It was a world where the stakes were high, the competition fierce, and the rewards tantalizingly out of reach for those not willing to fight tooth and nail for their share. As the day winds down and the last of the fish are sold, you take a moment to reflect on the symphony of commerce that's played out before you. It's a testament to human ingenuity, determination, and the relentless pursuit of prosperity. But it's also a reminder of the harsh realities that underpin even the most romantic of endeavours. The marketplace, with all its noise and chaos, is a living, breathing organism, a testament to the power of trade and the indomitable spirit of those who dared to brave the sea and the market alike. And so, as you leave the bustling market behind, the cries of merchants fading into the distance, you carry with you the knowledge that you've been part of something extraordinary. A vibrant, intricate network that shaped not just a nation, but a world. The story of the 17th century Dutch fisherman is far from over, and as you prepare to dive into the next chapter, you can't help but feel a sense of anticipation for the adventures that lie ahead. As you walk away from the vibrant chaos of the marketplace, still buzzing with the energy of bartered fish and boisterous merchants, it's time to peel back another layer of the herring onion. Life for a 17th century Dutch fisherman wasn't just about battling the sea and haggling over herring. Oh no, my friend, there was a whole web of social and political structures pulling the strings behind the scenes, some as tangled as a poorly managed net. Let's start with the state-imposed regulations that were as constant as the North Sea's chill. The Dutch government, ever the diligent overseer of commerce, didn't just sit back and let the fish flow freely. They had a vested interest in keeping the economy running like a well-oiled machine, or perhaps a well-salted barrel of herring. Taxes were the name of the game, and they were anything but trivial. We're talking up to 10% of your hard-earned catch, skimmed off the top to grease the wheels of bureaucracy. And if that wasn't enough to make you grit your teeth harder than a rusty anchor, there were also duties on the salt that preserved your precious cargo. Talk about adding salt to the wound. But before you start envisioning a dystopian world of heartless tax collectors, remember that these levies were part of a delicate balancing act. The state relied on these revenues to fund everything from naval defences to infrastructure improvements, essential for a maritime nation whose prosperity depended on open and secure trade routes. So while it might have felt like daylight robbery, those taxes were the grease that kept the wheels of Dutch commerce turning smoothly. Think of them as the original subscription fee for the privilege of participating in a burgeoning global economy. Speaking of global economies, let's not forget the geopolitical tensions simmering in the background like a pot of mussels on a slow boil. The 17th century was a turbulent time, with the Spanish, the English, and the French all jostling for dominance on the high seas. The Dutch, ever the savvy navigators, both literally and figuratively, had to tread carefully to maintain their position in this aquatic game of chess. Maritime trade routes were the arteries of the Dutch economy, and any disruption could spell disaster for the fishermen who depended on them. The Dutch Republic's ability to navigate these treacherous waters, both politically and geographically, was nothing short of remarkable. Now, let's talk about the unsung heroes of the fishing industry, the women and children who kept the whole operation afloat. You see, it wasn't just burly bearded men braving the elements while their families waited patiently at home. Oh no, the reality was far more complex. Women played vital roles in the fishing economy, from mending nets and salting fish to overseeing sales in the marketplace. They were the backbone of the industry, ensuring that the fruits of the men's labour didn't go to waste. Children, too, were part of this maritime tapestry. They didn't just sit around twiddling their thumbs. They were active participants, learning the ropes, sometimes literally, at a young age. Whether it was helping with the catch or running errands in the bustling market, their contributions were essential to the family's livelihood. So much for the romantic notion of a male-dominated seafaring adventure. The truth is, the fishing industry was a family affair, a community endeavour that required all hands on deck. This brings us to the interplay between local and national politics, a dance as intricate as any courtly waltz. Local officials wielded considerable power, often acting as intermediaries between the fishermen and the far-off seat of government. They were the ones who enforced regulations, collected taxes, and settled disputes, their authority as variable as the tides. Yet, for all their influence, they were also beholden to the whims of national politics, which could change as quickly as a storm rolling over the horizon. Fishermen, ever the pragmatic bunch, knew how to navigate these political waters. They understood that survival depended not just on their ability to catch fish, but on their skill in managing relationships with those in power. It was a delicate balance, maintaining the favour of local officials while avoiding the ire of national authorities. Like the seasoned sailors they were, these fishermen knew when to tack and when to hold their course, ensuring that they could continue their trade in an ever-shifting political landscape. So there you have it, a glimpse into the broader social and political structures that shaped the life of the 17th century Dutch fisherman. It was a world of complexity and contradiction, where the romance of the sea met the harsh realities of commerce and governance. As you prepare to dive into the next chapter, remember that this story is far from over. The sea, with all its untamed beauty and unforgiving power, still holds many secrets waiting to be uncovered. And so, as the mist rolls off the North Sea like a curtain revealing the stage of history, let's dive into the legacy of those intrepid Dutch fishermen. These hardy souls did more than just haul herring from the brine. They set the stage for a maritime revolution. But before we wax lyrical about their seafaring exploits, let's tackle the thorny issue of environmental impact. You see, our Dutch friends weren't exactly eco-warriors. The 17th century fishing boom was a double-edged sword, slicing through marine ecosystems with all the subtlety of a cannonball at a tea party. The North Sea, teeming with life, was their oyster, or should I say, their herring barrel. But as the demand for fish skyrocketed, so did the pressure on fish stocks. The Dutch, armed with their nifty herring buses and formidable nets, were fishing on an industrial scale. They could scoop up herring faster than you can say sustainability. And while their methods were marvels of efficiency, they also laid the groundwork for overfishing, an issue that still haunts us today. They may not have had Greenpeace on their case, but the environmental impact of their exploits is a sobering reminder of the cost of progress. Now, let's pivot to something a bit more uplifting, technological innovation. The Dutch were the Steve Jobs of their day, minus the turtlenecks. Their ships, those trusty herring buses, were nothing short of engineering masterpieces. Crafted from oak and designed to withstand the North Sea's turbulent moods, these vessels were the Formula One cars of the maritime world. And it wasn't just about the boats. Navigational instruments like the cross staff turned these fishermen into celestial cartographers, guiding their way by the stars with a precision that would make even NASA blush. And let's not overlook the genius of the Dutch approach to fish preservation. Salt wasn't just a seasoning, it was a lifeline. By perfecting the art of salting and barreling herring, they extended the shelf life of their catch from days to months. This wasn't just about avoiding a nasty case of food poisoning. It was about creating a commodity that could be traded across continents. This innovation in food preservation transformed fish from a local staple into a global product, a precursor to the modern food industry's obsession with shelf life and distribution. Speaking of modern parallels, the Dutch fisheries set a precedent for today's large-scale fishing operations and economic strategies. The Great Fishery was an early prototype of globalization, with trade networks stretching from the Baltic to the Mediterranean. The economic models they developed, based on efficiency and reach, laid the groundwork for contemporary capitalist ventures. If you've ever gazed at a can of tuna and thought, "How did you get here?" tip your hat to those Dutch pioneers who turned fish into global currency. But before we hoist the flag of the Golden Age too high, let's dissect the myths. The 17th century Netherlands is often romanticized as a utopia of wealth and culture, where windmills spun and tulips bloomed under a golden sun. It's a nice picture, but it's as airbrushed as a celebrity Instagram feed. The reality was a bit more nuanced. Yes, the Dutch were economic powerhouses, but that prosperity was built on the back of relentless labor, cutthroat competition, and a dollop of exploitation. The myth glosses over the harsh conditions faced by those who toiled at sea. Romantic visions of the noble fisherman battling the elements don't quite capture the daily grind of gutting herring in freezing winds, or the very real danger of not returning home. And while the Dutch economy flourished, the wealth wasn't exactly trickling down to the deckhands who risked their lives for a slice of the maritime pie. This was capitalism in its rawest form: opportunity for some, subsistence for others. And then there's the notion of Dutch tolerance and progressiveness. Sure, the Netherlands was a haven for free thought and innovation, but it was also a society rife with its own prejudices and hierarchies. The Golden Age wasn't a utopian free-for-all, it was a complex interplay of power dynamics, economic interests, and social structures. It's a reminder that history is never as black and white as we'd like it to be, but rather a spectrum of greys that challenge our interpretations. So, as we bid farewell to the salty tales of the 17th century Dutch fishermen, what's the takeaway for modern-day mariners and landlubbers alike? Perhaps it's a lesson in balance, the delicate art of innovation without exploitation, of progress without pillage. The Dutch fishing industry was a marvel of its time, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. But it also serves as a cautionary tale about the price of unchecked ambition and the environmental toll of our actions. As you let these thoughts wash over you like the tide, remember that history is both a mirror and a map. It reflects our past and guides our future, offering lessons in humility and hope. The Dutch fishermen of yore may no longer ply the seas, but their legacy sails on, a testament to the enduring dance between man, market, and the mighty sea. So whether you're casting a net or casting a glance at a history book, keep your eyes open and your mind curious. The sea of history is vast, and its depths are full of stories waiting to surface. The sun creeps over the ziggurat's peak, casting long shadows across the bustling city of Babylon, and you're already awake, priestly duties summoning you from the comfort of your reed mat. Today, like every other day, you're strapping on the sandals of a Babylonian priest in the 2nd millennium BC. If you thought modern influencers had clout, you haven't met your ancient predecessors. You're the OG of spiritual and economic sway, wielding power not with hashtags, but with the might of Marduk, the chief god himself. As you step into the temple precincts, you're entering the headquarters of economic power. Forget about stock markets and hedge funds. The temple is where the real magic, and by magic I mean money, happens. With its towering ziggurat, the Temple of Marduk isn't just a place of worship, it's the epicenter of economic and political power. It's your job to ensure it stays that way. The first order of business? Morning rituals that would make even the most meticulous Instagrammer envious. You begin with the purification rites, where water from the sacred Euphrates is sprinkled to cleanse the temple. Think of it as a spiritual version of a morning shower, but with divine purposes. And let's be honest, in a world without deodorant, this ritual is as much a practical necessity as a holy one. Once the temple is adequately spritzed, you move on to the sacrifices, animals, grains, and sometimes, if the gods are feeling particularly peckish, lavish feasts are laid out. These offerings aren't just spiritual gestures. They're investments in divine goodwill, ensuring the gods favor your city-state over that pesky rival down the river. But being a priest isn't all about chanting and incense. It's also about keeping the economy in check. You're not just a spiritual leader, you're also a tax collector. Because who else is going to fund the upkeep of these massive ziggurats? Maintaining these architectural wonders isn't cheap. Some estimates suggest that constructing a ziggurat could consume the labor of thousands over several years, not to mention the ongoing costs of maintaining its grandeur. Kind of like owning a sports car, but with a lot more mud bricks involved. In your role as a tax collector, you're collecting not just silver but grain, livestock, and other goods. Think of it as the ancient version of diversified investments. Every farmer, merchant, and craftsman owes a portion to the temple, and it's your job to make sure they pay up. Slacking on those temple taxes isn't just frowned upon, it's a straight-up ticket to divine disfavor, or at least that's what you tell people to keep the coffers full. And let's face it, in a time when gods could allegedly smite you with a bad harvest or a flood, people tend to listen. But your influence doesn't stop at the temple steps. As a priest, you're also a key player in city-state politics. Kings might wear the crowns, but it's priests like you who whisper in their ears, advising on everything from war campaigns to trade negotiations. Your counsel is sought after, not just for your wisdom, but because you're seen as the mouthpiece of Marduk. Your words carry the weight of divine authority, and in a city like Babylon, that's the kind of power that can move armies and build empires. As the morning sun climbs higher, the temple courtyard fills with a motley crew of petitioners. Traders seeking blessings for their caravans, farmers asking for bountiful harvests, and the occasional noble seeking divine guidance for their next political maneuver. Each one comes with offerings, hoping to curry favor with both you and the gods. It's a delicate dance of power and piety, one that you've mastered over years of service. By now you're probably wondering how this all plays out on the social ladder. Well, as a priest, you're living pretty comfortably. While the common folk might be toiling in the fields or crafting goods in the sweltering sun, you're enjoying the fruits of temple largesse, fine clothing, a steady supply of food, and perhaps even a bit of luxury. All part and parcel of being in the priestly class. But this isn't just about personal gain, it's about maintaining the temple's prestige and, by extension, your own. As the morning rituals wind down, you can't help but reflect on the balance of power you navigate daily. The temple isn't just a place of worship, it's a microcosm of the city-state's entire socio-political structure. You're at the heart of it all, orchestrating the complex interplay of religion, politics, and economics. And while the common folk might only see the rituals and the grandeur, you know the real work is in the unseen, in the careful management of resources and influence. With the sun now high in the sky, you prepare to step into the next chapter of the day, armed with the knowledge that in Babylon the gods may hold the ultimate power, but it's priests like you who pull the strings behind the scenes. As the sun reaches its zenith, you swap your ritual garb for the robes of a scholar. It's time to pivot from prayer to pondering, because in Babylon, priests aren't just spiritual conduits, they're the original brainiacs, the keepers of knowledge who dabble in everything from astronomy to early math. Forget the ivory tower academia of today, you're working in the ziggurat tower, where every scroll and clay tablet is a ticket to understanding the cosmos. Now, why would a priest be interested in the stars? Well, back then, a clear night sky was the closest thing to a Netflix queue, each constellation a new episode in the celestial saga. But it wasn't all just for cosmic kicks. Babylonian priests were the ancient world's answer to NASA, tasked with decoding the heavens to predict everything from eclipses to the gods' moods. You've got your stylus in hand, scratching out observations on clay tablets, ancient spreadsheets if you will. You're recording the movement of Jupiter, known as Marduk's star, noting its journey across the sky. It's like playing cosmic chess with the universe, where each move could signal a divine checkmate. And here's the kicker. All this celestial charting isn't just for fun. It's a vital part of agriculture, economics, and politics. Farmers rely on your star charts to know when to plant and harvest, miss the timing, and it's famine city. Kings look to the stars for auspicious times to wage war or broker peace, making your astrological prowess a tool of statecraft. In a world where the wrong move could mean the downfall of a city-state, you're not just a priest, you're Babylon's very own weather app and strategic advisor rolled into one. But don't imagine this star-studded work as a leisurely gaze at the cosmos. You're doing this without the luxury of telescopes or calculators. Instead, You're relying on a combination of keen eyesight, patience, and a bit of divine inspiration. Think of it as the ultimate test of faith and focus. And then there's the math. Ah, the math. Babylonian priests were pioneers of an early form of algebra, working with a numerical system based on 60, a system so ingenious we still use it today to tell time and measure angles. Ever wonder why an hour has 60 minutes? You can thank your Mesopotamian predecessors for that. Picture this. You're sitting with a clay tablet, carving out equations that would make today's algebra students break into a cold sweat. You're calculating the area of fields, dividing inheritances, and even dabbling in quadratic equations. All this, mind you, with a stylus and a slab of clay. It's like trying to solve calculus problems with a chisel and a block of marble. Yet, through this laborious process, you're laying down the foundations of mathematics, setting the stage for Pythagoras, Euclid, and every number cruncher who would follow. But let's not get too romantic about you scribbling away by lamplight. These mathematical feats weren't just intellectual exercises, they were practical necessities. Babylonian society thrived on trade, and accurate calculations meant the difference between profit and loss. Temples, being economic powerhouses, needed priests who could manage the flow of goods and silver with precision. In other words, your algebraic skills weren't just for bragging rights, they were essential for maintaining the temples and your own financial health. And what about education, you ask? Well, as a priest, you're also a teacher, guiding the next generation of scholars and scribes in the arts of reading, writing, and arithmetic. Think of it as the ancient version of homeschooling, where the curriculum includes cuneiform and celestial navigation. You're the gatekeeper of knowledge, passing down the wisdom of the ages to ensure that Babylon's intellectual torch never flickers out. Of course, this educational endeavor isn't without its challenges. Ever tried explaining the finer points of planetary motion to a room full of adolescents? It's a test of patience and persuasion, mixed with a dash of divine intervention. But you persevere, knowing that each student who masters the art of writing or the intricacies of math is one more pillar supporting the temple of knowledge. It's a legacy that stretches far beyond your lifetime, echoing through the corridors of history long after your clay tablets have crumbled to dust. So here you are, straddling the worlds of faith and reason, using the stars as your guide and the earth as your ledger. Your days are a delicate dance of numbers and narratives, where each calculation is a step towards understanding the universe and your place within it. As the sun begins its descent, you prepare to leave the realm of celestial studies behind, at least for now. There are more earthly matters to attend to, after all, but before you go, take a moment to appreciate the sheer audacity of your role. You're part of a tradition that sees no divide between the sacred and the scholarly, where the pursuit of knowledge is itself a form of worship. In a world where most people's lives are dictated by the whims of nature and the gods, you're one of the few who dares to unlock the mysteries of both. And while the rest of Babylon may sleep under the watchful eyes of the stars, you remain their interpreter, bridging the gap between heaven and earth with every stroke of your stylus. As you step away from your tablet, leaving behind the celestial calculations and algebraic musings, you can't help but marvel at the vastness of the universe and the small yet significant role you play in it. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new equations to solve, and new stars to chart. But for now, you've earned a moment of rest, a chance to reflect on the cosmic dance you've been a part of today. With the sun setting on another day in Babylon, you know that while the stars may hold their secrets, it's priests like you who hold the key to unlocking them. As the sun sets on another day in Babylon, your role as a priest transitions from the cerebral highs of astronomy and mathematics to the murkier waters of divine communication. It's time to don the mantle of the mediator, the one who stands between the people and the gods, a position that's as fraught with intrigue as it is with incense smoke. Get ready to debunk some myths, because not everything is as it seems when it comes to chatting with the divine. Now, let's get one thing straight. The idea that priests like you were having cozy fireside chats with Marduk is a delightful fiction. In reality, divine messages didn't arrive as neatly as an email in your inbox, but were more like cryptic text messages from an unlisted number. This is where the art of divination comes in, a mix of science, superstition, and a bit of showmanship. The ancient equivalent of reading tea leaves was examining the liver of a sacrificial animal, usually a sheep, because nothing says divine will quite like a freshly harvested organ. Here's the setup. After the animal meets its end, sacrificial rites being the ancient world's way of dialing up the gods, the liver is extracted and examined like it holds the secrets of the universe. Priests like you were skilled in hepatoscopy, a fancy term for liver reading. It sounds bizarre, but the liver was thought to be the seat of life and, by extension, the will of the gods. So, you'd spread the liver out on a specially crafted clay model, not unlike how a modern detective might pore over a crime scene, looking for clues. And these weren't just any old clues. The liver was divided into sections, each representing different deities and omens. A blemish here, a discoloration there, and voila, you had yourself a divine message. It's a bit like those choose-your-own-adventure books, but with a lot more at stake. The priest's interpretations could influence decisions on everything from agricultural practices to military campaigns. Imagine the pressure of knowing that a small liver anomaly could decide whether to go to war. But let's not pretend this was all mystical insight. There was a political element too, one that the priestly class, with its monopoly on divine interpretation, wielded like a well-honed weapon. After all, who could argue with the gods? Not the kings, that's for sure. The priests' interpretations were often tailored to support political agendas, maintaining the social order that kept priests in a lifestyle to which they had grown accustomed. Divine messages conveniently aligned with the interests of the ruling elite more often than not. Who knew the gods were such savvy politicos? Of course, this divine communication wasn't just a one-way street. Babylonian temples were bustling centers of ritual and prayer, where the ordinary folks came to make their pleas and offerings. It was a kind of celestial customer service, where you, as the priest, acted as the intermediary. You'd receive gifts, sometimes lavish, sometimes meager, from those hoping to curry favor with the gods. It's a system that kept the temple coffers full and the divine approval ratings high. But while the rituals were designed to reinforce the social order, they had an undercurrent of very human concerns. People came to the temple seeking answers to the big questions. Will I have a bountiful harvest? Will my children survive? Will the gods protect us from invaders? In a world where life was precarious and the future uncertain, the temple was a beacon of hope and stability, even if the answers sometimes came from the entrails of a sheep. So, while the notion of priests as divine interlocutors is wrapped in mystery and romance, the reality was a bit more pragmatic. It was about maintaining control, managing expectations, and ensuring the smooth running of society. The gods may have been the ultimate authority, but it was the priests who navigated the complex web of ritual and politics to keep the whole show running. And speaking of running a show, let's not forget the economic implications of all this divine mediation. Temples were economic powerhouses, owning lands, employing workers, and engaging in trade. The offerings brought to the temple weren't just spiritual tokens, they were vital resources that kept the temple and the city thriving. The priestly class managed these resources, ensuring that the temples and their own interests were well served. So, as you stand there in your robes, casting an eye over the temple grounds, you're not just a spiritual leader, but a key player in the socio-economic drama of Babylon. You're part of a system that's as much about earthly power as it is about divine will. And while the common folk may look to you for guidance and solace, you know that behind every ritual and prayer lies a complex interplay of faith and politics. As you wrap up the day's divine duties, you can't help but reflect on the intricate balance you maintain. You're not just interpreting the will of the gods, you're shaping the destiny of the city-state. It's a role that requires wisdom, diplomacy, and a touch of theatrical flair. And while the liver may hold the secrets of the gods, it's priests like you who hold the real power, using ritual and divination to steer Babylon through the uncertain waters of history. With the sun dipping below the horizon, you prepare to leave the temple precincts behind, at least for now. Tomorrow will bring new rituals, new supplicants, and perhaps a new liver to read. But for now, you've earned a moment of respite, a chance to reflect on the complex web of faith, politics, and economy that you navigate each day. In a world where the gods may seem distant, it's priests like you who bring their will to life, one ritual at a time. As you leave the temple precincts, the scent of incense still clinging to your robes, you head toward the heart of Babylon's bustling marketplace. It's here, amidst the cacophony of haggling merchants and the aroma of freshly baked barley bread, that the economic prowess of the priesthood truly comes into its own. Forget the serene images of priests as mere spiritual guides. This is where the cutthroat side of temple life reveals itself, where divine favor is bartered for cold, hard goods. Navigating the market, your role transforms from celestial mediator to savvy trader. You see, the temple doesn't just collect offerings, it's a key player in the city's economy, a veritable ancient Wall Street with priests like you at the helm. You're not just here to shop for groceries, though grabbing a few dates along the way never hurts, but to oversee the temple's expansive commercial interests. First up, grain storage, the lifeblood of Babylonian commerce. The temple's granaries are the ancient equivalent of a strategic oil reserve, a vital resource in a land where famine and feast danced a precarious tango. You manage these reserves with the precision of a chess master, ensuring that the temple's stockpiles are always full, ready to be doled out as loans to farmers during lean times. And here's the kicker. These loans aren't acts of charity. They're calculated investments with interest rates that would make a modern-day banker blush. Don't pay up, and the gods, conveniently speaking through you, might just decide your fields are due for a little divine drought. But grain is just the tip of the Mesopotamian economic iceberg. The temple's land holdings are vast, stretching across fertile plains that would turn even the most ambitious landlord green with envy. As a priest, you oversee these lands, ensuring that tenant farmers pay their dues in both crops and loyalty. It's a feudal system before feudalism was cool, where a good harvest means prosperity for the temple, and a bad one means the blame gets conveniently shifted to the whims of the gods. It's a neat trick, keeping the divine scales tipped in your favor. And let's not forget the temple's role as a major employer. Artisans, scribes, laborers, many find their livelihoods tied to the temple's economic machine. You're the HR department of the ancient world, managing manpower to maintain the temple's grandeur and keep those ziggurats standing tall. In a society where unemployment is less a statistic and more a life-or-death situation, providing jobs isn't just benevolent, it's a strategic move to maintain the temples and your own position at the top of the social ladder. Of course, the romantic notion of a priest as a purely spiritual figure takes a bit of a hit when you consider the wheeling and dealing going on. The temple's economic might allows it to exert significant influence over Babylonian commerce. Need to negotiate a trade deal with a neighboring city-state. Better have a priest on your side. Your position as a divine intermediary gives you leverage, a trump card you play with the deftness of a seasoned diplomat. After all, who would dare defy the representative of Marduk himself when it comes to setting grain prices or negotiating trade terms? And while the temple's economic power is undeniable, the myth of divine purity begins to show its cracks. The reality is that the temple's interests often align more with those of the ruling elite than with the common folk. The priesthood is a business, and like any business, it's driven by profit and power. Behind the facade of piety lies a complex web of economic motivations, where divine favor is often a matter of strategic alliances and calculated risks. As you make your way through the market, the voices of traders rise and fall like the tides of the Euphrates, each one hoping to secure a better deal, a better life. Yet, you know that for many, the temple is both a place of hope and a reminder of their place in the social hierarchy. It's a dual role that the priesthood plays with remarkable finesse, maintaining the delicate balance between spiritual guidance and economic dominance. So while the image of a priest as a humble servant of the divine is appealing, the reality is a bit more complex. You're not just a conduit for the god's will, you're a key player in the economic engine that drives Babylon forward. It's a role that requires cunning, negotiation skills, and a touch of ruthlessness qualities that keep the temple's coffers full and its influence unchallenged. As the afternoon sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows over the marketplace, you reflect on the intricate dance you perform each day. In a city where the lines between the divine and the mundane blur, you walk the tightrope with skill and precision, ensuring that the scales, both divine and economic, always tip in your favor. And while the gods may hold ultimate power, it's priests like you who ensure that their favor translates into tangible wealth and influence. But don't get too comfortable. The day isn't over yet, and the next chapter of your priestly life awaits. More deals to broker, more resources to manage, and perhaps a touch more divine intervention to invoke. It's all in a day's work for a Babylonian priest, the original master of multitasking in a world where survival depends on navigating the delicate balance of faith, politics, and commerce. As the market buzz fades and the evening shadows stretch across Babylon, it's time for you to trade in your merchant's hat for the ceremonial garb of a priest. You've just spent the day mingling with traders and managing economic affairs, but now the city expects you to orchestrate the grand theatrical production that is a Babylonian festival. This isn't just a religious affair, it's an all-out spectacle, complete with music, feasting, and enough pomp to put a modern-day parade to shame. Let's kick it off with the numbers. Because what's a festival without a budget, right? These events aren't just thrown together with a few figs and some leftover incense. We're talking about festivities that could involve thousands of participants, including dancers, musicians, and priests like yourself, all decked out in the finest ceremonial garb. The cost? Easily equivalent to a small fortune. Some estimates suggest that a single festival could consume resources that would otherwise feed a small village for weeks. But hey, what's a little extravagance when you're trying to keep Marduk and the rest of the celestial crew happy? Picture yourself at the heart of it all, standing at the base of the ziggurat as the sun sets, casting a golden hue over the city. The air is thick with anticipation and the scent of roasted lamb. A crowd favorite, by the way. As the head priest, you're the master of ceremonies, the one who ensures that every chant is in tune and every offering is on point. It's like being the director of the most elaborate stage production of the era, where the audience isn't just the citizens of Babylon, but the gods themselves. Now, here's where we bust a myth that's as persistent as the idea that the pyramids were built by aliens. People often think of these festivals as purely religious events, but let's be real, they're a public relations goldmine. The grandiosity of these festivals serve to reinforce social hierarchies and remind the populace of the temples and, by extension, your unassailable authority. It's a spectacle designed to dazzle, impress, and, let's face it, intimidate. After all, when you're able to throw a party that rivals anything the Kardashians could dream up, people tend to take notice. But don't get carried away by the glitz and glamour. Behind the curtain is a web of intricate planning and political maneuvering. These festivals weren't just religious duties, they were opportunities for the priesthood to strengthen alliances with powerful families and political leaders. Each invitation, each seat at the banquet table was a calculated move in the game of power chess. It's like the ancient version of a political fundraiser, where the divine theme is a convenient backdrop to some serious networking. And speaking of networking, let's not forget about the social responsibilities that come hand in hand with your priestly role. You're not just a religious leader, you're also a pillar of the community, expected to solve disputes, offer guidance, and maintain the moral fabric of society. It's a heavy crown to wear, though thankfully not a literal one, because those things are as uncomfortable as they look. People come to you with problems ranging from the mundane to the existential. Need advice on a business deal? Want to know if your neighbour's encroaching on your land? Or perhaps you're looking for a blessing before embarking on a long journey? It's all in a day's work. The priesthood is the original customer service, and you're the hotline, FAQ, and troubleshooting guide rolled into one. But here's the kicker. While you're busy solving everyone else's problems, you're also reinforcing the very social order that keeps the temple and you at the top. The public's reliance on the priesthood for guidance is a subtle yet powerful reminder of where the real authority lies. It's a dance of power and piety that keeps the wheels of Babylonian society turning smoothly. As the festival reaches its climax with music, dance, and maybe even a little inebriation, hey, some things never change. You take a moment to reflect on the enduring impact of your work. This isn't just about keeping the gods happy or maintaining social order. It's about legacy. The rituals and festivals you orchestrate today echo through time, influencing religious and political systems that will emerge millennia later. Consider how these ancient practices laid the groundwork for modern institutions. Temples as centers of both spiritual and economic power? Sounds a lot like the dual roles of modern churches and states, doesn't it? The intertwining of religion and politics is a theme as old as civilization itself, and your daily life as a priest is a testament to its enduring complexity. And while the mythic allure of the ancient priesthood is undeniable, let's not forget the hard truths. The romantic image of priests as purely spiritual guides is just that, a romantic image. In reality, it's a role that requires a keen understanding of human nature, an eye for opportunity, and a knack for balancing the sacred with the practical. It's a legacy that continues to shape our world, a reminder that the dance between power and piety is as timeless as the stars you charted by day. As the festival winds down and the city returns to its usual hum, you head back to your quarters, the echoes of the day's celebrations still ringing in your ears. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new rituals, and new opportunities to shape the fate of Babylon. But for now, you take a moment to bask in the knowledge that you are a part of something far greater than yourself, a tapestry of history woven with threads of faith, politics, and economy. So as you lay your head down, the sounds of the city fading into the night, consider this. While the world around you may change, the core of your role remains the same. You are the bridge between the mortal and the divine, the architect of a legacy that stretches across time. And while the gods may hold the ultimate power, it's priests like you who ensure that their will is felt, one festival, one ritual, one day at a time. In the swirling kaleidoscope of 16th century Denmark, young Tycho Brahe emerged like a comet streaking across an otherwise orderly constellation of noble Danish families. Born in 1546, Tycho's entrance into the world was anything but typical, courtesy of a family dynamic that could generously be described as eccentric. His father, Orte Brahe, was a nobleman of decent standing, while his mother, Beatty Beale, hailed from a line with political clout. Yet, in a plot twist that even Shakespeare might have found improbable, Tycho was abducted by his uncle, Jørgen Brahe, when he was just 2. Yes, kidnapped. But hold your horses, this wasn't some medieval hostage drama. Jørgen had no sinister plans, just a case of extreme favoritism. He and his wife, who were childless, simply decided that Tycho would be a better fit in their household. Denmark in the mid-500s was a patchwork of power plays, with nobles like the Brahes jostling for influence under the rule of King Christian III. The country was on the verge of economic transformation as trade routes expanded and the Protestant Reformation redefined religious and political landscapes. Against this backdrop, young Tycho was raised in an environment where intellectual curiosity was encouraged, albeit alongside the more traditional pursuits of swordplay and courtly manners. Now, let's talk about that duel. Tycho was just 20 years old, a student at the University of Rostock in Germany, when he found himself embroiled in a heated argument with fellow student Manderup Parsberg. The topic? A mathematical formula. Yes, a mathematical formula. This wasn't your typical tavern brawl over a spilled drink or a slighted maiden's honour. No, these two were squabbling about academic matters. Only in the 16th century, folks, but a squabble in those days was a serious affair, and it escalated into a full-on duel on December 29, 1566. When the dust and snow settled, young Tycho had lost a significant chunk of his nose to Parsberg's sword. Unlike most, who might have slunk away to nurse their wounds and pride, Tycho saw an opportunity. In a blend of resilience and vanity, he fashioned a metal prosthetic to replace his lost nasal section. Some accounts claim it was crafted from silver and gold, though contemporary analysis suggests a more humble brass alloy. Still, it was a shiny testament to his ingenuity and a bold statement piece at any court gathering. Imagine the glint of candlelight bouncing off that nose as Tycho held court with nobles and scholars alike. Denmark's nobles, meanwhile, were a breed apart. They were known for their eccentricities, and by the standards of the day, Tycho fitted right in. His contemporaries wore their quirks like badges of honour, dabbling in alchemy and astrology, as well as more pragmatic concerns like land management and trade negotiations. Tycho himself would later become the embodiment of this blend, with his astronomical pursuits funded by his noble status and familial connections. In the grand tapestry of Danish aristocracy, politics was a game as intricate as any chess match. Alliances were forged through marriages, broken by betrayals, and occasionally patched up by the church or the crown. The Brahe family, riding high on their noble credentials, were adept players. Tycho's uncle Steenbill, for instance, was renowned for his intellectual pursuits and was a key figure in the Danish Reformation. Such connections undoubtedly paved the way for Tycho's later ventures, including his famed observatory on the island of Fisherman. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. In these formative years, Tycho was just beginning to carve out his path. The duel and its aftermath were merely the opening acts in a life that would see him redefine the heavens. As Denmark transitioned from medieval to modern, Tycho straddled the worlds of tradition and innovation, his metallic nose gleaming as a symbol of his indomitable spirit. As Tycho's metallic nose gleamed under the flickering candlelight, the young noble was setting his sights on a different kind of spectacle, the heavens themselves. While most of us might think of stargazing as a quaint hobby, Tycho approached it with the seriousness of a man who just had a nose-to-nose encounter with mortality. He was hell-bent on charting the cosmos with a precision that would put today's GPS to shame, minus the satellites. And all this without the telescopic crutch future astronomers would lean on. That's right, no telescope. Tycho was the ultimate old-school astronomer, relying on his keen eye and some seriously impressive instruments of his own design. Now, you might wonder how a man with a penchant for dueling and an affinity for shimmering prosthetics found the time or the cash to pursue such lofty goals. Enter Uraniborg, Tycho's celestial palace on the island of Fisherman, nestled between Denmark and Sweden. Built in 1576, this wasn't just some backyard shed with a few star maps tacked to the wall. Uraniborg was the 16th century equivalent of a space-age research facility, complete with state-of-the-art instruments and a library that would give Alexandria a run for its scrolls. But before he could construct this astronomical wonder, Tycho needed to play the political game like a seasoned chess master. Let's face it, building a personal observatory wasn't exactly cheap. We're talking about a project that would cost the equivalent of millions in today's cash. So, Tycho turned to King Frederick II of Denmark, who was more than a little intrigued by the idea of having a national stargazer. After all, who wouldn't want to lay claim to the most advanced observatory in Europe? It was the space race of the 1500s, and Frederick was ready to back his man. With the king's blessing and considerable financial backing, Tycho got to work. Uraniborg rose from the ground like a Renaissance Hogwarts, complete with towers, underground observatories, and even a printing press. Yes, a printing press. Tycho wasn't just observing stars, he was publishing his findings to ensure his celestial discoveries reached the farthest corners of the scholarly world. Talk about a full-service operation. Then there was the economic angle. You see, Tycho's observatory wasn't just an ivory tower for starry-eyed dreamers. It was a hub of activity that boosted the local economy. Craftsmen and labourers found steady work constructing and maintaining the complex, while scholars and students flocked to Fisherman, eager to learn from the master himself. Tycho, ever the savvy operator, knew that keeping the locals happy and employed was good for business, and, more importantly, good for keeping those royal funds flowing. But let's not sugarcoat it. Tycho wasn't playing the part of benevolent benefactor just for kicks. He was a man with ambitions as astronomical as his observations. His meticulous data collection was unprecedented, and he was determined to map the heavenly bodies with an accuracy that would redefine the field. For over 2 decades, Tycho and his team compiled astronomical data that would serve as the foundation for future discoveries. Kepler, who famously refined the laws of planetary motion, stood on the shoulders of Tycho's giant data sets. Now, here's where the myth-busting comes into play. While Tycho is often romanticized as a lone genius scribbling away under the stars, the reality was a bit more complex and crowded. Uraniborg was a bustling centre of activity, with assistants, students, and even a jester or two. Yes, a jester. Because what's an observatory without a little comic relief? This was a team effort, and Tycho was more conductor than soloist, orchestrating a symphony of scientific endeavour. In the grand dance of politics and science, Tycho was a master choreographer, deftly navigating the currents of courtly intrigue and scholarly ambition. His observatory was a testament not only to his astronomical prowess, but also to his ability to play the patronage game like a virtuoso. But as with any great drama, the stars were aligning for a shift in Tycho's fortunes. Uraniborg's days were numbered, but not before it left an indelible mark on the history of astronomy. As the 16th century rolled into the 17th, Tycho's instruments continued to sweep the sky, capturing data with unparalleled precision. But even as he catalogued the cosmos, the winds of change were stirring. Economic realities and shifting political alliances would soon see Tycho packing his celestial bags, setting the stage for new chapters and new challenges. Stay tuned, because this cosmic tale is far from over. As Tycho Brahe packed his celestial bags and prepared to leave Uraniborg behind, the astronomer wasn't just closing a chapter on his personal observatory. He was stepping into a more tangled web of political intrigue and scientific rivalry that would make even the most dramatic of soap operas look like a toddler's puppet show. You see, Tycho was not exactly the poster child for plays well with others. His relationship with the scientific community was as tumultuous as a cat on a hot tin roof. Now, let's talk about Tycho and his patrons. You know, the ones who footed the bill for his astronomical endeavours. King Frederick II had been Tycho's biggest fan, giving him HVeen and the funds to build his observatory. But when Frederick kicked the bucket in 1588, the new kid in town, King Christian IV, wasn't quite as enamoured. Tycho's pomposity, combined with his extravagant spending, didn't sit well with the young king who was dealing with an economic downturn. After all, the Danish crown wasn't made of money, even if Tycho's prosthetic nose was rumoured to be. Enter Johannes Kepler, the mathematical whiz who would become both Tycho's greatest rival and collaborator. Kepler was the kind of guy who could see the beauty in a mathematical equation, the way some people see it in a sunset. He was a devout follower of the Copernican model, which put the sun, not the earth, at the centre of the universe, a concept Tycho found about as appealing as a cold porridge. Tycho had his own model, a geocentric one where the earth stayed put and the sun and moon did the cosmic cha-cha round it, while the other planets orbited the sun. It was a compromise, like a peace treaty between old-world thinking and the new heliocentric hotness. The relationship between these two astronomical heavyweights was a cocktail of admiration, tension, and a hefty splash of ego. When Tycho invited Kepler to join him in Prague, it wasn't exactly a meeting of kindred spirits, more like two alpha dogs circling each other, trying to decide if they could share the same patch of grass. Tycho had the data, mountains of it, collected with painstaking precision, but he lacked Kepler's theoretical prowess. And Kepler, well, he needed those data sets like a fish, needs water to breathe new life into his theories. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before their scientific bromance, if you can call it that, could bear fruit, Tycho had to deal with his own peculiar blend of science and superstition. Picture a man who could chart the stars with unmatched accuracy, yet still believed in astrology and alchemy. Tycho was the kind of guy who could calculate the orbit of a comet with the same enthusiasm as interpreting the zodiac, and he was convinced that the heavens held sway over earthly affairs. You could argue that this was part of his charm, or just a product of his time, when the lines between science and superstition were as blurred as a foggy morning. Tycho's scientific methods were as robust as his faith in mystical forces. His instruments, like the massive mural quadrant, were cutting edge for the era, allowing him to measure the positions of stars and planets with unprecedented precision. Yet, he was also obsessed with omens and portents, convinced that celestial events were harbingers of earthly doom or fortune. It was a peculiar duality, a bit like a modern scientist consulting their horoscope before a big presentation. Back to Kepler. When Tycho finally granted him access to his precious data, it was under strict conditions. It was as if Tycho handed Kepler the keys to a Ferrari but insisted he only drive it with the parking brake on. Kepler had to work under Tycho's watchful eye, which was as much about control as it was about collaboration. These constraints might have driven most people mad, but not Kepler. He was dogged, determined, and, let's face it, a bit desperate. He needed Tycho's numbers to validate his Copernican convictions, and he was willing to play the long game to get them. Despite the friction, this unlikely partnership bore fruit that would change the course of astronomy. Tycho's meticulous observations provided the raw material for Kepler's groundbreaking laws of planetary motion. It was a classic case of two brilliant minds coming together to achieve something monumental, even if they spent half the time glaring at each other over the lab table. Kepler took Tycho's data and ran with it, eventually formulating his 3 laws that describe the elliptical orbits of planets, a revelation that would pave the way for Newton's theory of gravitation. But was it all sunshine and rainbows? Hardly. Tycho's death in 1601 left Kepler in a precarious position. The data he so coveted was now locked away in a legal kerfuffle with Tycho's heirs, who were less than keen on handing it over. Let's just say that Kepler had to employ a little creative negotiation, some might call it cunning, to get his hands on the treasure trove of astronomical gold. As we wrap up this chapter of Tycho's life, it's clear that his story is one of contradictions. A nobleman with a penchant for extravagant spending, a scientist who danced with superstitions, and a mentor to one of history's greatest astronomers. Tycho Brahe was a man who lived and worked at the crossroads of tradition and innovation, his legacy etched into the celestial paths he so diligently charted. Yet, as the 17th century dawned, the stage was set for new players and new discoveries. Stick around, because this cosmic tale is just warming up. As Tycho Brahe's legacy unfolded, the stars above seemed to twinkle with both promise and peril. You see, the man who had spent years mapping the cosmos was now about to navigate a whole new constellation, one filled with political intrigue as dense as the Milky Way. Landing in Prague in 1599, Tycho was like a rock star entering a new city, albeit one with a jaw-dropping moustache and a nose made of brass. He was invited by none other than Rudolf II, the Holy Roman Emperor, a man whose court was a bizarre mix of scientific inquiry and alchemical mumbo-jumbo. If Uraniborg had been Tycho's dream observatory, Prague was the place where those dreams would either ascend to new heights or crash land spectacularly. Rudolf II was the kind of ruler who had a penchant for the arcane, a curiosity for the esoteric, and a treasury that was beginning to look suspiciously like a black hole. That didn't stop him from offering Tycho a cushy deal, an annual salary of 3,000 florins, a princely sum akin to what you'd need today to buy a modest sports car. But this wasn't just a blank check for stargazing. It was a golden ticket to the court's inner circle, a place where political alliances were as treacherous as quicksand. Tycho was tasked with setting up a new observatory in Benátky nad Jizerou, a quaint town that promised the kind of clear skies astronomers dream about. But let's not get too starry-eyed. For all the allure of Rudolf's court, it was a hornet's nest of backstabbing and suspicion. Tycho, the nobleman-turned-scientist, was no stranger to the delicate dance of courtly politics. Yet, even for him, this was a high-stakes game. The emperor was known for his mercurial temperament, and Tycho had to tread carefully, balancing his scientific ambitions with the whims of a ruler who might one day decide that astrology was more trustworthy than astronomy. Speaking of astrology, Tycho's move to Prague was a celestial shift in more ways than one. He brought along his trusty assistants, including a young Johannes Kepler, who was still trying to figure out how to turn Tycho's stacks of data into groundbreaking theories. Meanwhile, Tycho himself was busy playing the part of the emperor's go-to cosmic consultant, even drawing up horoscopes that would make today's astrologers look like amateur palm readers. But here's where the myth-busting comes in. While Tycho's image as a travelling scientist may evoke romantic visions of a lone genius under the stars, his reality was far more complex and, frankly, exhausting. The logistics of moving his household, equipment and staff across Europe were akin to organizing a medieval rock tour, complete with the equivalent of roadies and a stage manager. It was an operation that required meticulous planning and no small amount of cash, something Tycho was perpetually short on despite his imperial salary. Now, let's talk about the real drama, Tycho's mysterious death in 1601. Legend has it that he died from holding in his urine at a banquet, a tale that, while certainly colourful, doesn't hold much water. Modern analysis suggests he likely suffered from a burst bladder, a condition exacerbated by his penchant for rich foods and copious amounts of drink. It's a harsh end for a man who spent his life chasing the stars, but it underscores the grim reality that even the brightest minds are not immune to the frailties of the human body. In the aftermath of Tycho's untimely demise, the political vultures circled. His death left a power vacuum in the imperial court and sparked a legal battle over his astronomical data that would make any modern intellectual property lawyer cringe. Kepler, ever the opportunist, found himself in a tug-of-war with Tycho's heirs, who were less than eager to share the treasure trove of observations Tycho had amassed. In a twist of fate worthy of a Shakespearean play, Kepler eventually wrested control of the data, setting the stage for his own monumental contributions to science. As we wrap up this chapter, it's clear that Tycho Brahe was a man caught between two worlds, the noble courts of Europe and the vast expanse of the universe. His story is one of ambition, innovation, and a relentless pursuit of knowledge, but also of the harsh realities that come with being a trailblazer in a world that was as unpredictable as the cosmos itself. And while Tycho's journey ended in Prague, his legacy was just beginning to take flight, carried forward by those who would stand on his shoulders and reach for the stars. Stay tuned, because the next chapter promises even more cosmic twists and turns. So, as Tycho Brahe's celestial voyage concluded with a rather unceremonious splash in the annals of history, let's talk about what he left behind. His legacy, the kind that doesn't get tarnished by a little thing like a burst bladder. Tycho was a man whose data didn't just change the game, it rewrote the rulebook. His astronomical observations were nothing short of revolutionary, even if the man himself sometimes seemed more like a character from a Monty Python sketch than a scientific savant. Here's the deal. Tycho's meticulous records provided the raw material that Johannes Kepler needed to formulate his laws of planetary motion. This was no small feat. Tycho's data was the cosmic equivalent of a treasure map, guiding future astronomers through the celestial maze. And for all the drama and intrigue that surrounded his life, Tycho's work ultimately transcended the petty squabbles and courtly machinations of his time. His observations, painstakingly recorded without the aid of a telescope, were accurate to within a single arc-minute, a level of precision that would make even modern astronomers nod in approval. But let's not get too misty-eyed just yet. The reality of Tycho's contribution is a testament to his dogged determination and, frankly, his stubbornness. Remember, this was a guy who didn't just accept the status quo, he poked it in the eye with a sharp stick. He questioned the prevailing Ptolemaic model of the universe and, while he didn't fully embrace the Copernican heliocentric model either, his hybrid system laid the groundwork for future breakthroughs. In a way, Tycho was the bridge between the old world and the new, a fact that often gets overshadowed by stories of his eccentricities and that infamous prosthetic nose. Now, let's talk about Kepler, the man who took Tycho's data and ran with it like a thief in the night. Kepler's laws, those elegant equations describing planetary motion, are the stuff of legend, but they owe a tremendous debt to Tycho's groundwork. It's a classic case of standing on the shoulders of giants, and Kepler knew it. He once remarked that Tycho's death was like the setting of a great luminary, a poetic nod to the man who had, quite literally, charted the stars. Without Tycho's observational precision, Kepler might still be scratching his head over planetary paths rather than paving the way for Newton to come along and drop the gravity bombshell. But let's not forget the myths. The romantic notion of Tycho as a lone genius is as appealing as it is inaccurate. Sure, he was a visionary, but he was also the product of his time, a period when science was as much about who you knew as what you knew. His noble birth opened doors, and his savvy politicking kept them open. His story is a reminder that sometimes, in the grand game of history, it's not enough to be brilliant. You also need to be a bit of a chess player. For all his quirks, Tycho's legacy is undeniable. His influence stretched far beyond the confines of his own era, reaching into the future like a cosmic ripple. He was a man who dared to question the universe, even when his answers didn't align with the mainstream. And while he might have been a little too fond of alchemy and astrology for modern tastes, his scientific contributions are a testament to the power of human curiosity. In the end, Tycho Brahe was more than just the sum of his nasal prosthetic, dueling scars, and courtly escapades. He was a pioneer, a rebel with a cause, and a man whose passion for the stars lit the way for future generations. His life may have been as tumultuous as a Danish winter, but his legacy shines on, a celestial beacon guiding those who dare to dream beyond the horizon. As we close the book on Tycho's tale, remember that history is a tapestry woven with both myth and reality, and it's up to us to thread the truth from the legends. Because in the end, it's the stories we tell that keep the stars shining. In the land where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers flow like veins through the cradle of civilization, a Sumerian trader like you wakes up to a world without coffee. Yes, coffee. Now that's a luxury as far-fetched as flying chariots. Instead, you rise to the sun's relentless glare, already baking the mud-brick streets of your bustling city home. If you think your morning commute is rough, get a load of this. The day begins with a jolt from your straw mat, the aroma of baked barley bread your only wake-up call. Stepping outside, you're greeted by the sight of Ur's ziggurat, a towering structure that makes modern skyscrapers look like Lego towers. The ziggurat isn't just a fancy pile of bricks, it's a temple, marketplace, and social hub rolled into one. It's where the gods supposedly hang out, keeping an eye on the daily hustle. The city's buzzing with barterers and traders, each haggling over everything from grain to textiles. You wouldn't find a Starbucks here, but there's plenty of date wine flowing if that's your thing. Now, let's talk about those rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. You've got a love-hate relationship with them. They're your lifelines after all. They irrigate the fields, making the land fertile enough to grow the barley that's the backbone of your economy. But they're also unpredictable, flooding your fields one year and drying up the next. It's like they're playing some cosmic joke on you, as if the gods are flipping a coin every season just to see how you'll react. Today, you're gearing up for a trade expedition, and let me tell you, it's no walk in the park. First, you've got to gather your goods. You're trading barley, wool, and maybe a bit of copper if you're lucky. None of this gets loaded into convenient carts or trucks, though. Oh no, the wheel hasn't rolled into your life yet, so you're stuck with donkeys. That's right, donkeys. They're stubborn, slow, and have a mind of their own. Herding them is like trying to convince a cat to take a bath. Good luck with that. As you prepare, you can't help but chuckle at the thought of modern-day commuters whining about traffic jams and delayed trains. Try navigating a dusty path with a line of donkeys, each carrying sacks of grain that could tumble off with one wrong step. No GPS to guide you, no podcasts to keep you entertained, just the sounds of bleating livestock and the occasional shout from fellow traders. Your journey will take you along those vital rivers, trading with neighbouring city-states like Lagash and Eridu. It's a competitive business, and you know every trade route like the back of your hand. You've learned to read the sky for weather signs and the river currents for navigation clues. It's not just about getting from point A to B, it's about survival, strategy, and a little bit of luck. But before setting off, you make a stop at the temple. It's not all about piety, it's practical. You need the priest's blessing for safe travels and favourable trade. In exchange, you leave a modest offering, perhaps a few shekels or a portion of your goods. It's a small price to pay for divine favour, or at least the hope of it. After all, in a world where the gods are as temperamental as the rivers, every little bit helps. As you stand before the ziggurat, you can't help but think about how this city, with its towering structures and bustling markets, embodies both the achievements and struggles of human ingenuity. The Sumerians, your ancestors, invented the wheel and cuneiform writing, feats that would shape civilizations for millennia. Yet here you are, still wrangling donkeys and deciphering weather patterns like a primitive weatherman. You take a moment to appreciate the irony. The romantic tales of Sumerian prosperity often gloss over the harsh realities. The city-states are constantly at war, vying for control over these precious rivers. The gods demand offerings, the rulers demand taxes, and the rivers demand respect. It's a delicate balance, and you're just one trader trying to make his mark in this grand tapestry. Stepping away from the temple, you give one last look at its ziggurat casting a long shadow over the city. The day is young, and the road ahead is long. With a sigh, you turn toward the path, donkeys in tow, and begin your journey. As the dust kicks up around your feet, you can't help but wonder what future historians will say about this time, this place, and this trader. But that's a story for another day. For now, it's one step at a time, one trade at a time, until the sun dips low and the ziggurat's shadow stretches across the land like a silent, ancient witness. And with those donkeys trailing behind you like a herd of stubborn toddlers, you head straight for the heart of Mesopotamian commerce, the bazaar. Yes, the bustling, chaotic, wonderfully noisy bazaar. It's a symphony of sounds and smells, where everyone from the lowliest farmer to the haughtiest merchant rubs elbows in a daily dance of supply and demand. You've got your barley and wool ready, but before you dive into the fray, let's set the record straight about this whole trading gig. You see, the romanticized vision of ancient trade often involves grand caravans laden with gold, exotic spices, and silks fluttering in the wind. In reality, your average Sumerian trader was more likely to be haggling over a few goats for grain and not exactly rolling in luxury. The barter system, as it turns out, is less of a straightforward, you give me this, I give you that. and more of a complex negotiation process that could rival any modern-day business deal. When the goods in question are goats, grain, and maybe some copper, it becomes a delicate dance of estimating value, demand, and the ever-critical skill of persuasion. And let's not forget the invention of cuneiform, a game-changer in this ancient world. Imagine trying to remember who owes you what, without a smartphone or even a scrap of paper. Cuneiform was the first attempt at keeping track of these transactions. Picture this: a clay tablet, not much bigger than your hand, with a series of wedge-shaped marks that record everything from sales to legal agreements. It's not just writing, it's the cutting-edge technology of 3200 BC. And while it may lack the pizzazz of a modern spreadsheet, it gets the job done. Just be careful not to drop it. Clay tablets aren't exactly shatterproof. But back to the bazaar, where the sounds of haggling rise and fall like the tides of the Euphrates. Here you've got to have the gift of gab. Not just to sell your goods, but to secure the best deals. Say you've got a sack of barley. In your mind it's worth 2 goats. But the goat seller, a seasoned trader with a twinkle in his eye, insists it's only worth 1. And so begins the ritual of haggling, a verbal chess match where every word, gesture, and raised eyebrow carries weight. Now, you might think a few goats for a sack of barley sounds like a fair deal. But here's the kicker. The value of goods fluctuates depending on the season, the mood of the market, and even the whims of local rulers. It's like the stock market, only with fewer graphs and more bleating. You've got to keep your wits about you and your ears open. Is there a drought looming that could drive up the price of grain? Did a recent flood wipe out half the goat population? These factors could flip the balance of power in your favor or against it. And speaking of flipping the balance, let's debunk another myth, the idea of gold-laden caravans. The truth is, most trade wasn't conducted with precious metals. Instead, it was all about tangible goods, things you could see, touch, and, if you were feeling particularly adventurous, taste. We're talking about clay tablets, woven fabrics, and, of course, your trusty livestock. Gold was rare, and while it did make an appearance now and then, it was more of a status symbol than a common currency. As you negotiate your way through the bazaar, you can't help but marvel at the sheer complexity of it all. Each transaction is a small piece of a much larger puzzle, a web of trade routes and economic alliances stretching across city-states like Lagash, Uruk, and Eridu. It's a network that not only fuels your local economy, but also shapes the political landscape. Alliances are forged and broken over trade deals, and the prosperity of your city hinges on the success of its merchants. Of course, not everyone in the bazaar is a master negotiator. There are those who fall for the oldest trick in the book, the promise of an unbeatable deal that's too good to be true. You, however, have learned to keep a healthy dose of skepticism in your back pocket. If someone offers you an unheard-of quantity of copper for a few bushels of barley, you know to tread carefully. After all, in this game of trade, the only thing more valuable than goods is your reputation. As the sun climbs higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the bustling market, you reflect on the skills you've honed over years of trading. You've become a walking, talking calculator, weighing the value of goods against an ever-changing backdrop of supply and demand. It's a skill that serves you well, not just in the market, but in life. After all, every interaction is a negotiation of sorts, whether you're bartering for grain or vying for a better spot in the social pecking order. In the midst of all this commerce, you can't help but chuckle at the thought of future historians romanticizing your day-to-day hustle. Sure, there's a certain glamour to the idea of being a trader in ancient Mesopotamia, a mysterious figure navigating the crossroads of civilization. But behind the allure lies a reality of hard work, strategic thinking, and the occasional bout of luck. You know that every deal, every tablet etched with cuneiform, is a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. As the day winds down and the crowds begin to thin, you take a moment to survey the bazaar. You've made a few deals, lost some, and learned a thing or two along the way. It's been a good day, all things considered, and as you prepare to head back to you're reminded of the ever-present balance between the myth and the reality of your world. It's a world where gods and rivers dictate your fate, where trade routes and alliances shape the course of history. And through it all, you're just one trader, trying to make his mark in the grand tapestry of Mesopotamian life. So, with your donkeys loaded and your mind a bit richer for the experience, you turn your steps back towards the city. The shadows of the ziggurats stretch long and lean across the landscape, a silent witness to the day's events. And as the dust settles around your feet, you know this is just another chapter in the ongoing saga of trade, tradition, and the timeless dance of human ambition. After all, in the world of ancient commerce, the story never truly ends. It just keeps evolving, one transaction at a time. With the sun casting its golden glow over you and your trusty herd of donkeys set out on the dusty path. This isn't your typical scenic road trip, mind you. It's more like a gritty endurance test with a side of existential dread. Forget about wheels, you're working with beasts of burden and a whole lot of patience. The wheel, that game changer for all things transport, won't roll into Mesopotamian life until around 3500 BC. So, for now, you're hoofing it, quite literally. As you plod along, you can't help but feel a little like Indiana Jones, minus the fedora and whip. Instead, you've got a linen tunic and sandals that kick up more dust than a Sumerian sandstorm. Your path is strewn with the remnants of past travellers. The odd broken pot, a discarded sandal, and, if you're lucky, the occasional piece of copper. It's a reminder of all those who have trekked before you, each with their own hopes pinned on the fickle gods of trade. Speaking of gods, you might want to throw a quick prayer their way because, out here, danger lurks around every bend. Marauding bandits are less of a Hollywood cliché and more of a daily reality. These guys are the original highwaymen, ready to pounce on an unguarded convoy and make off with your hard-earned goods. It's like an ancient episode of Survivor, with the stakes set in barley and wool instead of $1 million prize. Add to this the unpredictable wrath of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and you've got yourself a journey that makes modern-day commutes look like a walk in the park. These rivers are the lifeblood of your trade routes, but they're about as reliable as a politician's promise. One minute, they're your best friends, guiding you gently along their banks. The next, they're flooding your path or drying up entirely, leaving you high and dry. Literally. But hey, who needs predictability when you have a thriving network of trade routes connecting you to places as far-flung as Anatolia and the Indus Valley? That's right, global trade was a thing even back in the 3rd millennium BC, minus the air miles, of course. This ancient web of commerce is a testament to human ingenuity and ambition, connecting city-states across Mesopotamia in a grand tapestry of economic exchange. As you navigate these dusty paths, you start to appreciate the sheer complexity of it all. Every donkey laden with goods represents a thread in this intricate network, each trader a node in a vast, interconnected web. From Anatolia, you're getting copper and tin, essential for making bronze, which is kind of a big deal when you're in the business of crafting tools and weapons. Meanwhile, the Indus Valley supplies exotic goods like carnelian beads and lapis lazuli, adding a splash of colour and luxury to the otherwise utilitarian landscape of trade. But let's not get carried away with the romantic notion of ancient trade as some sort of noble endeavour. The reality is far grittier. You're not just battling the elements and the occasional bandit, you're also up against stiff competition from rival traders. It's a cutthroat business, where alliances are forged and broken faster than you can say cuneiform tablet. And speaking of cuneiform, those clay tablets are your saving grace, recording every transaction with a precision that rivals any modern spreadsheet. Just try not to drop one. They're about as fragile as your ego after a bad trade. As the sun dips lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the landscape, you find yourself reflecting on the duality of your world. It's a place where myth and reality intertwine, where the gods demand offerings and the rivers demand respect. Yet, amid the chaos, there's a certain beauty in the struggle, a testament to human resilience and the relentless pursuit of prosperity. In the end, it's not just about the goods you trade or the deals you strike. It's about the journey itself, the stories you gather along the way, and the legacy you leave behind in the annals of history. So, as you trudge onward, dust swirling around your feet, you can't help but marvel at the enduring spirit of the Sumerian trader, a figure of grit and determination in a world of uncertainty. And with that, you set your sights on the horizon, where the promise of new opportunities, and perhaps a few more perils, await. The road ahead is long, winding, and fraught with challenges, but it's your road, and you're determined to walk it one dusty step at a time. Because in the grand tapestry of human history, every journey, no matter how humble, adds a thread to the ever-evolving story of civilization. And so, with determination and a healthy layer of dust settling on your shoulders, you press on through the arid Mesopotamian landscape. The destination, an ancient trade hub, where your goods will hopefully transform into shiny shekels, or, at the very least, something more valuable than the blisters on your feet. But fair warning, my friend, you're about to dive headfirst into the murky waters of politics and trade. And let me tell you, the waters are about as clear as those of the Euphrates after a storm. As you approach the city gates, you're struck by the sight of towering walls, imposing structures that scream both protection and bureaucratic nightmare. These city-states, you see, are like mini fiefdoms, each a kingdom unto itself, with a ruler more interested in erecting the next great ziggurat than in the plight of a humble trader. But here's the kicker. To do business within these walls, you've got to play the game, and the rules are anything but straightforward. First up, meet the local officials. Think of them as the original gatekeepers. In theory, they're here to regulate trade and keep things orderly. In practice, they're more like toll booths with a pulse. Except instead of coins, you're often paying in goods or favours. And let's not sugarcoat it, bribery is a time-honoured tradition. You might call it greasing the wheels of commerce. They call it ensuring smooth transactions. Either way, it's a necessary evil as timeless as the trade itself. So, what's the going rate for a bribe these days? Well, that depends on the official's mood, the size of your load, and perhaps the alignment of the stars. A few shekels can go a long way. Or maybe a portion of your copper, barley, or wool is more their style. It's a delicate dance of give and take, where one misstep could mean your goods are left to bake in the sun while you plead your case to a less than sympathetic ear. Once through the gates, you're greeted by the cacophony of the market. It's a vibrant scene, but don't get too comfortable. You're not just here to trade, you're here to navigate a web of taxes and tariffs that would make even the most seasoned accountant break a sweat. That's right. Government interference in trade is as old as civilization itself. Consider it the price of doing business in the cradle of civilization. Each city-state has its own set of rules, and deciphering them is like trying to read cuneiform in a sandstorm. There are import duties, export taxes, and fees for simply existing within the city limits. It's an intricate system designed to fill the city's coffers and keep the local rulers' ziggurat-building dreams alive. And while it might seem like an ancient version of highway robbery, it's also a reminder that even in 3000 BC, the government had its fingers in your pie. Now, let's talk tariffs. These aren't just some modern-day invention to irritate international traders. They've been around since the first donkey carried a sack of grain across a border. Tariffs are the city-state's way of protecting its own interests, encouraging local production, and, of course, making a quick buck off of foreign goods. It's a balancing act of economic strategy, one that echoes through the ages. But wait, there's more. You also have to contend with the whims of the local ruler, a figure often more concerned with their next temple dedication than with your trading woes. These rulers, or NCs as they're sometimes called, are the glue holding the city-state together, but they're also the ones who can decree new trade regulations faster than you can say Sumerian bureaucracy. And let's not forget the ever-present threat of war, as city-states vie for control over those precious rivers. One day you're trading peacefully. The next, you're caught in the crossfire of a territorial dispute. Amidst all this chaos, there's a certain irony to be found. The romantic notion of Sumerian prosperity often glosses over the harsh realities of trade in this era. It's not all about the exotic goods and grand caravans. It's about survival, strategy, and navigating a system that's as unpredictable as the rivers themselves. And while the legends might paint a picture of opulence and grandeur, the truth is far grittier. So there you are, smack dab in the middle of this ancient economic dance, trying to make your mark in a world that's as unforgiving as it is fascinating. The trade routes you tread are the lifeblood of the city, connecting you to distant lands and weaving a complex web of commerce that shapes the political landscape. It's a testament to human ambition, a relentless pursuit of prosperity that's as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago. As you haggle over grain and wool, with the weight of bureaucracy pressing down on you like the midday sun, you can't help but marvel at the enduring spirit of trade. It's a dance as old as time, one that shaped the course of history and laid the foundation for the world we know today. And through it all, you remain a humble trader, navigating the intricacies of this ancient world with grit, determination, and a healthy dose of humour. Because in the end, it's not just about the goods you trade or the shekels you earn. It's about the journey, the stories you gather along the way, and the legacy you leave behind in the annals of history. So, as you stand in the heart of the bustling market, surrounded by the sights and sounds of commerce, you know that this is just another chapter in the ongoing saga of trade, tradition, and the timeless dance of human ambition. And with that, you brace yourself for the next round of negotiations, ready to face whatever challenges the world of ancient trade throws your way. After all, in the grand tapestry of human history, every journey, no matter how humble, adds a thread to the ever-evolving story of civilization. And as you know all too well, in the world of ancient commerce, the story never truly ends. It just keeps evolving, one transaction at a time. So, with your bargaining hat still on, and your donkeys patiently waiting, you find a moment to ponder the grand tapestry of your life as a Sumerian trader. It might not be the glamorous life of endless riches and exotic adventures that some might imagine, but it's a life that's deeply woven into the fabric of civilization itself. And as the sun dips low over the Mesopotamian plains, casting its final golden glow on the ziggurats and mud brick houses, it's time to reflect on what it all means. Firstly, let's cut through the gilded facade of the noble trader myth. Sure, in the romantic retellings, you're a dashing figure, perhaps a proto-Indiana Jones without the hat and whip. But the reality? You're more akin to a human calculator, mentally juggling numbers and haggling over goat prices in a world where every transaction feels like a high-stakes poker game. And while the modern world might see you as a pioneer of commerce, back in your day, you were just another cog in the great Sumerian machine. Yet, what a cog you were. You laid the groundwork for practices that would eventually evolve into the complex global economic systems we see today. Take currency, for instance. You didn't have coins jingling in your pockets. Those wouldn't clink into existence until around 600 BC in Lydia. Instead, you dealt with shekels, primarily as a weight of silver, but more often than not, you exchanged goods directly. This barter system was both a blessing and a curse, requiring a keen sense of value and a silver tongue sharper than any cuneiform stylus. It's a system that, despite its flaws, created a foundation for future monetary systems. You might not have invented the dollar, but your daily grind laid the groundwork for it. And let's not forget taxes, the eternal thorn in the side of humanity. You, my friend, were navigating a labyrinth of levies that would make any modern taxpayer's eyes water. The NC demanded a cut of your hard-earned goods, using those taxes to fund everything from temple upkeep to the local military. Sound familiar? The more things change, the more they stay the same. Your struggles with ancient bureaucracy are a testament to the timeless dance between individual enterprise and state control, a dance that continues to this day, albeit with more paperwork and fewer clay tablets. But what about those social hierarchies you were entangled in? Well, your status as a trader placed you in a unique position within Sumerian society. You were neither a lowly labourer nor a high-ranking priest, but your role was crucial. You connected city-states, facilitated the exchange of goods and, inadvertently, ideas. As you traded barley and wool with Lagash or Eridu, you also traded cultural practices, religious beliefs, and technological innovations. You were, in essence, the internet of your time, less Wi-Fi and more donkey caravan, but still a conduit for connection and change. And speaking of change, let's talk legacy. While your day-to-day might have seemed like a slog through mud and bureaucracy, the seeds you planted grew into mighty oaks of economic and social evolution. The trade routes you travelled morphed into silk roads and spice trails, and the barter system you navigated evolved into sophisticated financial markets. The Sumerians even gave us cuneiform, the world's first writing system, because they needed a way to keep track of all this trade. So, every time someone swipes a card or signs a contract, they're echoing your ancient transactions. Now, as the last rays of the sun disappear behind the horizon, leaving the sky awash in twilight hues, let's appreciate the humour in it all. You, a Sumerian trader, were part of an ancient world where taxes, bureaucracy, and the unpredictable nature of trade were as common as the dust on your sandals. Thousands of years later, we're still wrestling with the same issues, albeit with more technology and fewer donkeys. Isn't it ironic how the human condition remains consistently inconsistent? In the end, your life as a Sumerian trader was as much about survival as it was about legacy. You may not have been the hero of an epic tale, but your story is woven into the very fabric of history. The cities you connected, the goods you bartered, and the paths you walked all contributed to the grand narrative of human civilization. And as you lay down to rest, the sounds of the bustling bazaar still echoing in your ears, you can take comfort in knowing that your footsteps were part of a journey that continues to this day. So, here's to you, the unsung hero of ancient commerce. May your story remind us that, while the players and the props may change, the human drive to trade, connect, and thrive remains as strong as ever. And as the stars begin to twinkle over the Mesopotamian plains, casting their gentle light on the ziggurats and the rivers below, your legacy shines on, a testament to the enduring spirit of trade and the indomitable will of humankind.